Hey there, welcome back. Before we dive in, take a deep breath and let the stress of the day melt away. I'm really glad you're here, and I'd love to get to know you better. So if you had to choose, what would be your favourite food? Let me know in the comments. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. And enjoy. The notification chimed softly in Liam Hale's dorm room at 3:47 a.m, casting a pale blue glow across his cluttered desk. Another rejection. The Temporal Studies Department had denied his application for legal time travel access for the third time this semester, citing his insufficient academic standing and lack of financial guarantee. He stared at the holographic rejection letter floating above his tablet, the words burning into his retinas like acid. Outside his window, London's skyline stretched endlessly into the night, its towers piercing the synthetic atmosphere dome that had protected the city since the climate wars of 2081. Somewhere in those gleaming spires, the wealthy elite purchased their time slots like theatre tickets, casually hopping between centuries while students like Liam scraped together credits for synthetic protein meals. His obsession with Jack the Ripper had started as a childhood fascination, evolved into an undergraduate thesis, and now consumed every waking moment. The case remained unsolved after 2 centuries, despite countless historical expeditions. The temporal authorities claimed the fog of 1888 London created too many variables, too many risks. But Liam knew better. They simply didn't want some debt-ridden student making the discovery that had eluded their precious licensed historians. The Black Market Forum notification appeared in his peripheral vision, discreetly encrypted and barely visible. Glasseye 88 had replied to his desperate inquiry from 3 weeks ago. Liam's heart hammered as he opened the message. "Got what you need, kid. Whitechapel, September 1888. 3 minutes, dirt cheap. Previous owners couldn't handle the pressure. Device has been recycled 17 times. Still functional, but warranty voided. Meet me at the old Tottenham Court Station ruins, tonight. Come alone." Liam's hands trembled as he read the message twice more. 17 previous owners. He wondered what had happened to them all, but the opportunity blazed too bright to ignore. His student loan debt already guaranteed a lifetime of servitude to the corporate state. What was a little more risk? 2 hours later, he stood in the abandoned subway tunnels beneath London, breathing the musty air of forgotten infrastructure. The ruins of Tottenham Court Station stretched around him like a cathedral of decay, its Victorian ironwork twisted by decades of neglect. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, gaunt, with prosthetic eyes that gleamed silver in the darkness. "You're younger than I expected," the man said, his voice carrying the hollow echo of vocal cord implants. "This isn't a game, boy. Time travel isn't like your university simulations." "I understand the risks," Liam replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need to get to 1888, September 8th, if possible." The man laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Specific. I like that. Shows you've done your research." He produced a small device from his coat, a brass-coloured watch with exposed gears and a cracked crystal face. "This beauty has seen some action. 17 trips, 17 disappointed customers, but it still works. Mostly." Liam examined the watch, noting the strange symbols etched around its circumference. The craftsmanship was clearly pre-regulation, from the early days of temporal experimentation. What happened to the previous owners? Some came back, some didn't. Some came back different. The man's silver eyes reflected no emotion. "That's not my concern. Are you buying or not?" The price was lower than Liam had dared hope, barely a month's worth of meal credits. He transferred the payment and accepted the watch, feeling its weight in his palm. The metal was warm, almost alive. "Word of advice, kid," the man said as he prepared to leave. "Time has a way of protecting itself. Don't try to be a hero." Back in his dorm, Liam spent the remaining hours before dawn studying historical records, police reports, and witness testimonies from the autumn of 1888. The Ripper's first canonical victim, Mary Ann Nichols, had been found dead on August 31st. If he could arrive on September 8th, he'd be positioned perfectly to observe the killer's pattern before the murder of Annie Chapman. At sunrise, he sealed his door and activated the watch. The world dissolved into fractals of light and shadow, time folding in on itself like origami made of moments. His consciousness stretched across decades, experiencing the weight of every year between 2092 and 1888. Then, with a sensation like falling upward, he landed. The fog hit him first, thick, choking, and tinged with the acrid smell of coal smoke and human waste. London in 1888 was a sensory assault. The gas lamps flickered like dying stars through the mist, casting everything in a sickly yellow pallor. Horse hooves clattered on cobblestones, mixing with the distant sound of drunken laughter and shouted arguments. Liam stood in a narrow alley, his modern clothes instantly marking him as an outsider. He fumbled for the watch, pressing the return sequence. Nothing happened. He tried again, panic rising in his throat. The device remained cold and lifeless in his palm. "Lost, love?" a woman's voice cut through his terror. She emerged from the fog like a ghost, thin, tired, but with intelligent eyes that seemed to see through his facade immediately. "You look like you've seen a spectre." "Dot," Liam stammered, trying to orient himself. "I'm looking for... I need to get home." She laughed, but not unkindly. "Don't we all? Name's Nellie. And you're not from around here, are you? That accent, those clothes. You're either lost or running from something." Before he could answer, footsteps echoed from the mouth of the alley. 3 rough-looking men approached, their intentions clear in the way they moved. Liam had read about the poverty and desperation of Victorian London, but experiencing it firsthand was different. These men weren't just criminals. They were survivors in a world that offered no alternatives. "Well, well," the largest man said, his voice thick with gin and malice. "What have we here?" "A gentleman playing dress-up in Whitechapel." They fell on him quickly, efficiently. Liam tried to fight, but his university self-defense classes were useless against their brutal practicality. They took everything: his credits, his identification, even his shoes. The watch, thankfully, remained hidden in his inner pocket. Nellie helped him to his feet after the men had vanished into the fog. "Lucky they didn't cut your throat," she said, examining his injuries. "Come on then, can't leave you bleeding in the street." Her lodging house was a revelation in squalor. A single room shared with 3 other women, the walls stained with damp and decades of smoke. But it was warm, and Nellie tended to his wounds with surprising gentleness. "You're not just lost," she observed, cleaning a cut on his forehead. "You're lost in time, aren't you?" Liam stared at her, speechless. "How did you... I've seen your type before. Clean teeth, soft hands, confused look. You're not the first to wash up here, claiming to be from somewhere else." She settled back on her heels, studying him. "Question is, are you one of the mad ones or one of the stuck ones?" Over the next few days, Nellie introduced him to an underground network of displaced individuals. They called themselves the Adrift, people who had arrived in Victorian London from various points in the future, all claiming their return devices had failed. Some had been there for decades, aging naturally and adapting to their circumstances. Others had arrived more recently, still clinging to hope of escape. The leader of sorts was a woman named Margaret, who claimed to have been a molecular biologist in 2034. She had established a small medical practice in the East End, using her future knowledge to provide basic healthcare to the poor. Her story was typical: a legal time travel expedition gone wrong, equipment failure, abandonment by the authorities. "The dirty secret of time travel," she explained over thin soup in a basement that served as their meeting place, "is that equipment fails more often than they admit. The companies that manufacture these devices build in obsolescence. They want repeat customers, not permanent solutions." Liam showed them his watch, and Margaret examined it with interest. "This is older than anything I've seen. Pre-regulation. See these symbols? They're not standard temporal calibration marks. This is prototype technology." "Can you fix it?" Liam asked. "Not with what we have here, but there are rumours." She glanced around the room, noting the other displaced individuals listening intently. "They say the original inventor of black market time travel left something behind. A device called the Anchor. It's supposed to be able to stabilise temporal fields, even repair damaged equipment." An elderly man named Dr. Finch leaned forward. He claimed to have been a physicist in 20067 before being stranded in 1875. "The Anchor isn't just a repair device," he said quietly. "It's a temporal stabiliser, the prototype for all modern time travel technology. The inventor buried it here in London before he died, afraid of what his creation might become." "Where?" Liam pressed. "The old Masonic Lodge on Dorset Street. But you'll never reach it. Hawthorne controls that territory now." The name sent a chill through the room. Hawthorne was apparently another time traveller, but one who had embraced his displacement and turned it into power. He controlled a network of temporal refugees, using their knowledge of the future to build a criminal empire in Victorian London. He's been looking for the anchor for years, Margaret continued. Claims he wants to use it to help people return home. But we know better. He wants to control time itself. That night, Liam walked the streets of Whitechapel, trying to process everything he'd learned. The fog was thicker than usual, muffling sounds and creating strange shadows. He found himself near Bucks Row, where Mary Ann Nichols had been found murdered just days before his arrival. A figure emerged from the mist, tall, well-dressed, with an air of authority that seemed out of place in this squalid neighbourhood. The man's eyes were sharp, intelligent, and familiar in a way that made Liam's skin crawl. "You're the new arrival," the man said, his voice carrying the crisp diction of education and privilege. "I'm Hawthorne. We need to talk." "I don't think we do," Liam replied, backing away. "Oh, but we do. You see, that device you carry, it's not just any temporal mechanism, it's a key to something I've been searching for quite some time." Hawthorne smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. "I'm prepared to offer you a deal, your freedom in exchange for a small favour." "What kind of favour?" "Help me find the anchor. Your device contains quantum signatures that can track the original temporal field. With it, I can locate the inventor's burial site." Liam felt the weight of the watch in his pocket. "And if I refuse? Then you'll spend the rest of your life in this cesspit of history, watching people die of diseases that were cured before your great-grandfather was born. Your choice." Before Liam could respond, Hawthorne melted back into the fog, leaving only the echo of his footsteps and a sense of impending doom. The next morning brought terrible news. Annie Chapman had been found murdered in Hanbury Street, her body mutilated in a way that matched the previous killing. The police were baffled, the newspapers sensational, and the people of Whitechapel terrified. Liam had read about these murders in historical texts, but experiencing them firsthand was different. The fear was palpable, the grief real. He found Nellie near the crime scene, her face pale with shock. "They're saying it's the same killer," she whispered, "that he's not done yet." "Nellie," Liam said carefully, "what if I told you that the killer might not be from this time?" She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean? What if someone from the future came back to change history? Or to study it? What if they got lost in their own experiment? You think one of your people is Jack the Ripper?" The possibility had been haunting him since his arrival. Time travel was heavily regulated in 2092, but the black market existed precisely because people wanted to circumvent those regulations. How many desperate, disturbed individuals had purchased faulty devices and found themselves trapped in the past? That evening, Dr. Finch approached him with disturbing news. "I've been asking questions about the Ripper murders," he said quietly. "There's something you need to know. The killer knows things he shouldn't. Anatomical details, surgical techniques that won't be discovered for decades. You think he's from the future? I think he's from our future, and I think he's completely insane." The revelation changed everything. If the Ripper was indeed a time traveller, then Liam might be the only person in 1888 with the knowledge to stop him. But first, he needed to find the anchor and get home. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like the London fog itself. Margaret had been researching the Masonic Lodge, using her connections among the displaced to gather intelligence. "The building has been abandoned for 5 years," she reported. "But Hawthorne's people watch it constantly. They know something's hidden there. We need a distraction," Liam said. "Something to draw them away." "Or," Nellie interjected, "we need to go through them." She had been listening to their conversations, learning about the temporal refugees and their situation. Her intelligence and resourcefulness had impressed everyone, but her suggestion was dangerous. "This isn't your fight," Liam told her. "It is now. This is my time, my city, my people being murdered. If there's a chance to stop it, I'm taking it." They spent the next few days planning. The lodge sat on Dorset Street, in the heart of Hawthorne's territory. His network of temporal refugees and local criminals maintained constant surveillance, making direct approach impossible. But they had advantages too. Dr. Finch's knowledge of Victorian architecture, Margaret's medical expertise, and Nellie's intimate familiarity with the East End's hidden passages. The breakthrough came when Liam realised his watch wasn't just broken, It was resonating with something nearby. The quantum signatures Hawthorne had mentioned were real, creating a subtle harmonic that grew stronger as he moved toward the lodge. "It's like a compass," he explained to the others. "The closer I get to the anchor, the stronger the resonance becomes." They entered the lodge through the sewers, crawling through passages that stank of human waste and industrial runoff. The building's basement had been sealed, but Victorian construction was no match for future knowledge and desperate determination. They broke through into a sub-basement that appeared on no official plans. The chamber they found was extraordinary. The walls were covered in equations and diagrams that wouldn't be discovered for decades. In the centre sat a device that looked like a fusion of clockwork and crystalline technology, the anchor. "My God," Dr. Finch breathed. "It's beautiful!" But their triumph was short-lived. Footsteps echoed from above, and Hawthorne's voice carried down through the building. "I know you're here. The building is surrounded. There's nowhere to run." They had minutes at most before discovery. Liam examined the anchor, trying to understand its operation. The device was clearly prototype technology, far more advanced than his simple watch, but using similar principles. Quantum field manipulation, temporal stabilization, dimensional anchoring. It was all there, waiting to be activated. "Can you make it work?" Margaret asked urgently. "I think so, but I need time to calibrate it properly." "Time we don't have," Nellie said, checking the passages they had used to enter. "They're coming." The confrontation was inevitable. Hawthorne descended into the chamber with 3 of his most trusted lieutenants, all of them armed with weapons that seemed anachronistic for the Victorian era. Energy weapons, Liam realised. They had brought technology from the future. "Step away from the device," Hawthorne commanded. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "I understand perfectly," Liam replied, his hands moving across the anchor's controls. "You want to control time itself. Use it for personal gain." "Personal gain?" Hawthorne laughed bitterly. "I want to fix this world. Do you have any idea what the future holds? The wars, the plagues, the environmental collapse. With the anchor, I can prevent all of it. By becoming a dictator in the past? By becoming a guide, a shepherd to humanity's development." Hawthorne's eyes blazed with fanatical fervour. "I've seen what happens when history runs its course. Millions die needlessly. I can save them." "You can't save them by enslaving them," Dr. Finch interjected. "I've seen men like you before. They always start with good intentions." The argument was interrupted by a new sound. Footsteps from another direction. Someone else was in the building, moving with purposeful stealth. Hawthorne's expression shifted to confusion, then alarm. "Who else knows about this place?" he demanded. The answer came in the form of a man emerging from the shadows, tall, gaunt, with wild eyes and blood on his hands. He moved with the jerky, unpredictable motion of someone who had lost touch with reality. "Jack," Nellie whispered. The Ripper had found them, and he was clearly from the future, his clothes a bizarre mixture of Victorian and modern elements. In his hand he carried a surgical knife that gleamed with an inner light, another piece of future technology. "So many voices," he muttered, his eyes darting between the assembled group. "So many timelines. Which one is real? Which one matters?" "You're the one who's been killing those women," Liam said, keeping his voice steady despite his terror. "Killing or saving. Every death creates ripples. Every ripple changes everything." The Ripper's smile was horrible to behold. "I've been trying to find the right combination, the perfect sequence of events, but time keeps healing itself. History resists change." "You're insane," Margaret said. "Insane?" The Ripper laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I'm the only one who sees clearly. This whole century is a mistake, a wrong turn in the path of human development. I'm trying to correct it." The confrontation erupted into violence. Hawthorne's men moved to subdue the Ripper, but he was faster, more desperate. His knife found flesh, and screams echoed through the chamber. In the chaos, Liam desperately worked to activate the anchor. Nellie fought beside him, using her knowledge of the building's layout to outmaneuver their attackers. But she was only one person against trained killers from the future. When she fell, blood spreading across the stone floor, Liam felt something break inside him. "No!" he screamed, abandoning the anchor to kneel beside her. "Finish it," she gasped, her hand pressing against his. "Don't let them win." The anchor hummed to life, its crystalline components beginning to glow. Liam felt the temporal field stabilising, reality becoming malleable around the device. He had a choice to make: use it to return home, or destroy it to prevent Hawthorne from achieving his goals. But there was a third option. The anchor wasn't just a time travel device, it was a temporal manipulator. He could use it to send Nellie forward, to a time when her injuries could be healed, when she could live the life she deserved. "I can save you," he told her, "send you to the future." "No," she said firmly. "This is my time, my place. Save yourself." The battle raged around them. Hawthorne had killed the Ripper, but at great cost. His men lay dead or dying, and he himself was wounded. Only he and Liam remained standing, facing each other across the glowing anchor. "You can't destroy it," Hawthorne said, his voice weak but determined. "Too many people depend on it. Too many lives hang in the balance." "The balance you want to control," Liam replied. "The lives you want to manipulate. I want to save them. You want to play God." Liam made his choice. He activated the anchor's return function, but not before programming it with a virus, a quantum cascade that would destroy the device after sending him home. Hawthorne lunged forward, trying to stop him, but it was too late. The world dissolved once again, time folding and reshaping itself around him. But this time, the journey felt different, more controlled, more precise. The anchor had given him a perfect return to his own time. He woke in his dorm room, the broken watch still in his hand. According to his chronometer, he had been gone for exactly 3 minutes. But he remembered weeks in Victorian London, the friends he had made, the woman who had died to save him. Frantically, he accessed historical records, searching for any trace of Nellie. There, Eleanor Hutchinson, listed as a social reformer who had worked to improve conditions in the East End. She had lived to the age of 73, dying peacefully in her sleep. Her obituary mentioned her mysterious knowledge of medicine and her uncanny ability to predict social trends. The Jack the Ripper case remained officially unsolved, but Liam noticed something new in the records. The final victim, Mary Jane Kelly, had survived her attack. According to police reports, she had been found injured but alive, claiming that her attacker had simply disappeared into the fog. The Ripper murders had ended abruptly with no clear resolution. Liam knew the truth. The Ripper, the mad time traveller, had died in that basement chamber, his temporal manipulations finally catching up with him. History had healed itself, but not without scars. He spent the next several months writing his thesis, carefully disguising his real experiences as theoretical speculation. The paper became viral within academic circles, proposing that the Ripper murders might have been committed by someone with advanced knowledge of anatomy and surgical techniques. He suggested that the killer's sudden disappearance could be explained by temporal displacement, a theory that was both revolutionary and impossible to prove. The thesis earned him grants, recognition and admission to the Advanced Temporal Studies program. But Liam had no intention of using legal time travel. He had seen what happened when time became a commodity, when the past became a playground for the privileged and the desperate. Instead, he founded a support group for temporal refugees, people who claimed to be displaced from other times. Most were delusional, but a few had stories that rang true, stories of failed equipment, abandoned expeditions and corporate cover-ups. The black market forum where we'd purchased his watch had disappeared, but a new one had taken its place. The administrator used the handle Glasseye 88, a reference that made Liam's blood run cold. The silver-eyed man from the ruins was still out there, still selling broken devices to desperate people. But most disturbing of all was the message he received 6 months after his return. It appeared in his personal files, encrypted beyond anything that should have been possible in 2092. The sender was listed as H. Smith, a name that could have been anyone, but Liam knew better. "You think you've won?" the message read. "You think destroying the anchor ended my plans? But time is vast and I am patient. There are other devices, other opportunities, other timelines where I succeed. This isn't over." The message was accompanied by a photograph, a group of people standing outside a building that looked suspiciously like the Masonic Lodge. But the photograph was dated 1847, 40 years before Liam's arrival in Victorian London. In the centre of the group stood a man who looked exactly like Hawthorne. Liam stared at the image for a long time, understanding finally dawning. Hawthorne hadn't been another displaced time traveller. He had been something far worse, a temporal parasite jumping between timelines and centuries, always seeking the perfect moment to seize control. The anchor hadn't been his destination. It had been one stop in a much longer journey. The implications were staggering. If Hawthorne could move between timelines, then destroying the anchor had only delayed his plans, not stopped them. Somewhere, somewhen, he was still out there, still manipulating events from the shadows. Liam closed his laptop and walked to his window, looking out at the London skyline. The city stretched endlessly in all directions, its towers piercing the artificial sky. But now he could see the temporal layers beneath the surface, the Roman settlement, the medieval city, the Victorian sprawl, the modern metropolis, all of them existing simultaneously, separated only by the thin membrane of time itself. And somewhere in those layers, Hawthorne was waiting, patient, dangerous, and closer than ever to achieving his ultimate goal. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it filled him with a strange sense of purpose. He had been marked by time itself, chosen to stand guard against those who would abuse its power. It was a responsibility he had never asked for, but one he would not shirk. The broken watch sat on his desk, its cracked face reflecting the city lights. It would never work again, but it served as a reminder of the price of temporal manipulation. Time was not meant to be bought and sold, traded like any other commodity. It was meant to be experienced, lived, and respected. Liam picked up his tablet and began to write. Not another academic paper, but a warning disguised as fiction. A story about the dangers of treating time like a marketplace, about the unintended consequences of cheating history. Most people would read it as entertainment, but a few would recognise the truth hidden within. And perhaps, somewhere in the vast expanse of time and space, Nellie would read it too. The woman who had chosen her own era, her own fate, her own death. The woman who had reminded him that some things were worth fighting for, even if the battle could never truly be won. The notification chimed softly on his tablet. Another message from the support group. Another person claiming to be displaced from time. Another story of failed equipment and abandonment. Liam smiled grimly and opened the message, ready to help if he could, ready to listen if he couldn't. After all, time was all any of them really had. And in the end, how they chose to spend it was what mattered most. Outside his window, London continued its eternal dance between past and future, unaware of the invisible war being fought in the spaces between seconds. But Liam was aware, and he was watching, always ready. Because somewhere in the fog of time, Hawthorne was still out there, still planning, still dangerous. And the next time they met, Liam would be ready for him. Owen Riley stared at the glowing screen of his laptop, fingers dancing across the keyboard as lines of code scrolled past. The familiar blue light cast shadows across his thin face in the darkened bedroom of their modest Arizona home. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, but Owen barely noticed the beauty beyond his window. He was too busy trying to crack the encryption on an old gaming console he'd found at a yard sale, determined to unlock whatever secrets it held. At 15, Owen had already earned a reputation as the quiet kid who could fix anything electronic. His classmates at Mesa High either ignored him entirely or found creative ways to remind him he didn't belong. Just last week, Brad Hutchins had shoved him into a locker, calling him a freak, loud enough for half the hallway to hear. Owen had picked himself up, brushed off his worn jeans, and said nothing. He'd learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. "Owen, dinner!" His mother's voice carried down the hallway, tired but warm. Sarah Riley worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, morning shifts at the medical clinic and evening shifts at the diner. She never complained, but Owen could see the exhaustion in the way her shoulders sagged when she thought he wasn't looking. He saved his progress and padded to the kitchen, where his mum had set out 2 plates of microwaved spaghetti. She smiled when she saw him, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It hadn't for years, not since his dad disappeared when Owen was 8. "Find anything interesting in that old game system?" she asked, twirling pasta around her fork. "Maybe. The firmware's corrupted, but I think I can rebuild it." Owen pushed his food around his plate, not really hungry. "Mum, do you ever think about Dad's stuff? The things Grandpa kept in the cabin?" Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She rarely talked about Owen's father, Colt Riley, or about the desert cabin that had belonged to Owen's grandfather. When Colt vanished without explanation, it had nearly destroyed her. The cabin had been boarded up ever since, too painful a reminder of the man who'd left them behind. "Why do you ask?" she said carefully. I keep thinking there might be answers out there, something that explains why he left." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Some people just aren't meant to stay, honey. Your dad had his demons. Whatever happened to him, it wasn't your fault." But Owen had never believed that. Deep down, he felt certain his father hadn't abandoned them by choice. The man who'd taught him to solder circuit boards and told him bedtime stories about gunfighters and outlaws wouldn't have just walked away. Something had happened to Colt Riley, and Owen intended to find out what. 3 days later, Owen stood before the weathered wooden door of his grandfather's cabin, armed with a crowbar and a backpack full of supplies. The structure sat 20 miles outside of town, accessible only by a dirt road that wound through sagebrush and rocky outcroppings. He'd borrowed his mum's old Honda and told her he was going to study at the library. The lie tasted bitter, but some things were worth the risk. The door gave way with a groan of protest, and Owen stepped into the musty interior. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through grimy windows. The cabin was small but well built, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and shelves lined with books about electronics, mechanics, and strangely enough, the American frontier. His grandfather had been an engineer, but apparently he had also been fascinated by the Old West. Owen spent an hour rifling through drawers and boxes, finding old photographs, technical manuals, and his grandfather's collection of pocket watches. Most were broken or missing parts, but one caught his attention, a heavy brass timepiece with an intricate face and unusual wiring threaded through the case. Unlike the others, this one had strange inscriptions etched into the metal, symbols that looked almost like circuitry but followed no pattern Owen recognised. He turned the watch over in his hands, studying the craftsmanship. The back was engraved with initials, CR, his father's initials. Owen's pulse quickened as he examined the device more closely. The wiring wasn't decorative, it was functional, connected to tiny components that looked far more advanced than anything that should have existed when pocket watches were common. Without really thinking about it, Owen began to tinker with the mechanism. He'd always been able to understand how things worked just by looking at them, and this watch was no different. He found a loose connection and gently pressed it back into place. The moment the circuit closed, the watch began to hum with a low, almost inaudible vibration. The face lit up with a soft blue glow, and Owen felt a strange tingling in his fingertips. The air around him seemed to shimmer, and for a moment he could have sworn he heard voices, distant, muffled, speaking in accents he didn't recognise. Then the light faded, and the cabin was silent again. Owen stared at the watch, his heart racing. He'd definitely triggered something. But what? He tried to recreate the effect, pressing various components and adjusting the tiny dials, but nothing happened. The watch remained stubbornly dark and silent. He slipped the device into his pocket and continued exploring the cabin. In a trunk beneath the bed, he found his father's journals, pages and pages of notes about time, physics, and something called temporal displacement theory. The handwriting was Colt's, but the content was far beyond anything Owen would have expected from his father, who'd worked as a mechanic at the local garage. As evening approached, Owen reluctantly prepared to leave. He'd found more questions than answers, but at least now he had a place to start. The watch clearly meant something important, and his father had been researching concepts that most people would dismiss as science fiction. He was loading his backpack when the storm hit. Desert storms could be violent and unpredictable, but this one seemed to come from nowhere. One moment the sky was clear, the next it was black with roiling clouds shot through with lightning. Thunder shook the cabin's walls and rain began to hammer against the roof. Owen decided to wait it out. He'd driven through desert storms before, but this one felt different, more intense, more charged with electricity. He could feel it in his bones, a humming vibration that seemed to resonate with something deep inside him. The watch in his pocket began to grow warm. Owen pulled it out and gasped. The blue glow was back, brighter than before, and the inscriptions on the case were pulsing with their own inner light. The humming sound grew louder, and the air around him began to shimmer and distort. "What the hell?" Owen whispered, backing away from the watch. But he couldn't let go of it. His fingers seemed frozen around the brass case. Lightning struck the cabin's roof, and in that instant everything went white. The sensation was like being turned inside out while falling through a tunnel of light and sound. Owen felt his body stretching, compressing, spinning through space and time. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The world dissolved into chaos, swirling colours, deafening noise, and a pulling sensation that threatened to tear him apart. Then, suddenly it stopped. Owen hit the ground hard, face first in cold, muddy water. He gasped and sputtered, rolling over to stare up at a sky that looked wrong somehow. The air smelled different too, dusty and sharp, with an undertone of horses and wood smoke. "Well, I'll be damned," a voice said from somewhere above him. "What in the Sam Hill are you supposed to be?" Owen sat up, wiping mud from his eyes, and found himself looking at 3 men on horseback. They wore wide-brimmed hats and long coats, and each carried a gun on his hip. The man who'd spoken was middle-aged with a greying beard and suspicious eyes. Where am I?" Owen managed to say. The men exchanged glances. "You're at Miller's Crossing, about 5 miles west of Rustwood," bearded man said. "Though I'm more interested in what you're wearing, boy. Never seen clothes like that before." Owen looked down at himself and realised he was still in his jeans and t-shirt. Distinctly modern clothing that would stand out like a beacon in whatever time and place he'd landed in. The watch was still clutched in his hand, now dark and silent. "You some kind of performer?" another man asked. "Circus folk, maybe?" Before Owen could answer, the third man, younger and meaner looking than the others, drew his gun. "I don't like the look of him, Jake. Could be trouble." "Easy, Pete," the bearded man said, but his hand moved to his own weapon. "Boy, you'd better start explaining yourself, and fast." Owen's mind raced. He clearly wasn't in 2025 anymore. The men's clothes, their speech patterns, even the quality of light suggested he'd somehow travelled back in time. But how far back? And more importantly, how was he going to survive long enough to figure out how to get home? I'm from back east," he said, falling back on a story he'd heard in countless Western movies. "My family sent me out here to toughen me up." The men didn't look convinced, but before they could press him further, a woman's voice cut through the air. "What's all this fuss about?" Owen turned to see a young woman approaching on foot, leading a horse behind her. She was maybe 17, with dark hair pinned up under a worn hat, and eyes that missed nothing. Her dress was practical rather than fancy, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who could handle trouble. "Found this strange boy at the crossing, Clara," Jake said. "Claims he's from back east, but look at those clothes." The woman, Clara, studied Owen with interest rather than suspicion. "He looks half-drowned and scared to death. Whatever his story is, it can wait until he's dried off and fed." "Now hold on," Pete said, his gun still drawn. "We don't know nothing about him." Clara's expression hardened. "Put that gun away, Pete Morrison, before I tell your mama you're waving it at children." Pete's face reddened, but he holstered his weapon. "He ain't no child, Clara." "Something's off about him." "Something's off about you too, but we don't shoot you for it," Clara replied tartly. She turned to Owen. "You got a name, boy?" "Owen," he said. "Owen Riley." "Well, Owen Riley, you look like you could use a hot meal and a place to sit down. Jake, Pete, Tom, you boys ride on ahead and tell folks in town there's a newcomer coming. I'll see he gets to Rustwood safely." The men clearly didn't like it, but they rode off without further argument. Clara walked over to Owen and helped him to his feet. "Thank you," Owen said. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up." Clara smiled, and it transformed her whole face. "Pete Morrison's bark is worse than his bite, but you're right to be careful. Rustwood's not the friendliest place for strangers, especially ones who dress like you." She studied his clothes again. "Where exactly are you from, Owen Riley? And don't tell me back east. I've seen eastern clothes and those aren't them." Owen hesitated. He had to give her something that sounded believable. "I'm from up north. Way up north. My family's involved in some experimental manufacturing. These clothes are prototypes." It was a weak story, but Clara seemed to accept it. "Experimental manufacturing, huh? Well, that would explain why you look like you fell out of the sky." She gestured toward her horse. "Can you ride?" Not really," Owen admitted. "Then you'll walk. It's not far to town, and the exercise will help warm you up." She swung into the saddle with practiced ease. "Come on, then. And Owen, you might want to think up a better story before we get to Rustwood. People there don't much like mysteries." As they walked, Clara filled him in on the local situation. Rustwood was a small frontier town dominated by a corrupt sheriff named Marlowe Griggs and a wealthy land baron named Silas Cade. Most of the honest folks kept their heads down and tried to stay out of trouble. "What year is this?" Owen asked, trying to sound casual. Clara gave him a strange look. 1873? You sure you didn't hit your head when you fell? Owen's knees went weak. He'd travelled back over 150 years. The implications were staggering, not just for him, but for history itself. What would his presence here change? What butterfly effects might he set in motion? "You all right?" Clara asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Owen lied. "Just tired." Rustwood was exactly what he'd expected from a frontier town. Dusty streets, wooden buildings, and people who looked like they'd stepped out of a Western movie. The only difference was that this was real. The smells were stronger, the sounds sharper, and the sense of danger more immediate than anything Hollywood could capture. Clara led him to a saloon called the Silver Dollar, where she apparently lived and worked. The proprietor, a weathered woman named Maggie, took one look at Owen and shook her head. "Another stray, Clara. You can't keep collecting them like lost puppies." "He's not a stray," Clara said firmly. "He's a paying customer, aren't you, Owen?" Owen checked his pockets and found his wallet, but paper money wouldn't exist in its current form for decades. He did, however, have some coins, quarters and dimes that might pass for silver in this time period. "I can pay," he said, showing a handful of change. Maggie squinted at the coins. "These look foreign. What kind of currency is this?" "Northern silver," Owen said quickly, "from the experimental mint I mentioned." It was another weak lie, but Maggie seemed to buy it. "Well, silver's silver, I suppose. Clara, get the boy some food and a room, and find him some proper clothes before Sheriff Griggs sees him." Over the next few days, Owen began to adapt to life in 1873. Clara found him a set of used clothes that fit reasonably well, and he practiced the mannerisms and speech patterns he'd absorbed from watching Western movies. He was surprised by how much his obsession with the genre helped him blend in. The hardest part was the technology, or lack thereof. Everything had to be done by hand, from lighting fires to preparing meals. There was no electricity, no running water, and certainly no internet. Owen felt like he'd been cut off from life itself. But he also began to appreciate things he'd never noticed before. The quality of silence at night, broken only by natural sounds. The way people looked each other in the eye when they talked. The sense that individual actions mattered in a way they rarely did in the modern world. It was Clara who introduced him to Jed Hollows, a retired gunslinger who now worked as the town's unofficial peacekeeper. Jed was in his 60s, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much, but he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who'd survived more than his share of trouble. "So you're the mysterious boy from the north," Jed said when they met. "Been hearing talk about you." "Nothing bad, I hope," Owen said. "Depends on your definition of bad." Jed studied him carefully. "You know how to use a gun?" "No, sir." "Well, that's something we'll have to fix. Man can't survive out here without knowing how to defend himself." Jed paused. "Mind if I ask what that is you're carrying?" Owen followed his gaze to the pocket watch, which he'd taken to carrying openly as a way to seem more authentic. "It's a family heirloom. My father gave it to me." Jed went very still. "May I see it?" Owen handed over the watch and Jed examined it with the same careful attention he might give a suspicious stranger. When he saw the inscriptions, his face went pale. "Where did you say you got this?" "From my father. His name was Colt Riley." Jed nearly dropped the watch. "Colt Riley? You're Colt Riley's boy? You knew my father? Knew him?" Jed laughed, but there was no humour in it. "Son, your father saved my life, twice, and he carried a watch exactly like this one." Owen's heart raced. "When was this? When did you know him?" "Must have been, 15 years ago now. He rode into town just like you did, dressed in strange clothes, carrying that watch. Said he was looking for someone, but he never said who. Stayed about 6 months, then vanished one night without a word." "What was he like?" Jed handed the watch back. "Smartest man I ever met. Could fix anything, build anything, figure out problems that stumped everyone else. But he was searching for something, always looking over his shoulder like he was expecting trouble." "Did he say anything about time? About travelling through time?" Jed's eyes narrowed. "Why would you ask something like that?" Owen realised he'd said too much. "Just curious. He used to tell me stories about visiting different times and places." Well, he never mentioned time travel to me, but then again, your father was a man who kept his secrets. Jed stood up. Come on, boy. If you're Colt Riley's son, then I owe it to him to teach you how to survive out here. Over the following weeks, Jed taught Owen to ride, shoot, and fight. The lessons were brutal but effective. Owen had natural coordination and quick reflexes, and he learned fast. More importantly, he began to understand the unwritten rules of frontier life. When to stand your ground, when to back down, and how to read people's intentions from their body language. Clara, meanwhile, helped him understand the social dynamics of Rustwood. She worked at the saloon, but wasn't what Owen had expected from Western movies. She was smart, well-read, and fiercely independent. She'd come to Rustwood to escape an arranged marriage back east, and had made her own way in a world that didn't offer many opportunities for women. You're different from the other men around here, she told him one evening as they sat on the saloon's porch, watching the sunset paint the desert red and gold. You listen when women talk, for one thing, and you don't assume you know everything already. Where I come from, women are more equal, Owen said carefully. Must be nice. Maybe someday it'll be like that everywhere. It will be, Owen said, then caught himself. I hope it will be. Clara smiled. You're an optimist, Owen Riley. That's a rare thing in a place like this. Their conversation was interrupted by shouting from the street. A group of men had surrounded a young Native American, maybe 14 years old, and were accusing him of stealing a horse. Owen recognised the leader as Pete Morrison, the same man who'd wanted to shoot him when he first arrived. I didn't steal nothing, the boy protested. I was just watering my horse at the trough. That's not your horse, Injun, Pete snarled. That's Ben Tucker's mare. I'd recognise her anywhere. You're wrong. This horse belonged to my father. The crowd was growing uglier by the moment. Owen could see that they weren't interested in the truth. They'd already decided the boy was guilty. Clara stood up. I'm going to stop this before it gets out of hand. Is that wise? Owen asked. Probably not. But it's the right thing to do. She walked into the street, and Owen followed. He'd learned enough about the politics of Rustwood to know that Clara's intervention might make things worse, but he couldn't stand by and watch an innocent person get hurt. That's enough, Clara called out. You men should be ashamed of yourselves, ganging up on a child. Stay out of this, Clara, Pete warned. This is men's business. It's everyone's business when you're about to lynch an innocent boy. How do you know he's innocent? Another man demanded. Clara pointed at the horse. Look at that mare's left front hoof. She's got a distinctive crack that runs from the toe to the coronet. Ben Tucker's horse has the same marking, but so do a dozen other horses in the territory. It's not proof of anything. The crowd hesitated, but Pete wasn't deterred. She's been shod recently. Indian ponies don't get shod. My father traded with the white man, the boy said desperately. He had our horses shod at the forge in Canyon Creek. Convenient story, Pete sneered, but I say you're lying. That's when Owen noticed something the others had missed. The boy was wearing a medicine bag around his neck, and hanging from it was a small piece of metal that looked suspiciously like a broken horseshoe nail. Wait, Owen said, stepping forward. Let me see that nail you're wearing. The boy looked confused, but showed him the pendant. Owen examined it closely, then looked at the horse's shoes. Sure enough, one of the nails was missing from the left front shoe, and the break pattern matched the piece the boy was wearing. This nail came from that horse, Owen announced. But look at the oxidation pattern. It's been broken for weeks, maybe months. If this boy stole the horse recently, he wouldn't have had time to collect a souvenir and let it weather like this. The crowd murmured uncertainly. Owen's explanation sounded scientific and authoritative, even if most of them didn't understand the details. Besides, Clara added, everyone knows the boy's father, Running Bear, died last month. The horse was probably his, and now it belongs to his son. Pete's face darkened. You're taking the word of a savage over honest white men? I'm taking the word of the evidence, Owen said firmly, and the evidence says this boy is telling the truth. The crowd began to disperse, but Pete wasn't finished. You're both going to regret this, he said. Sheriff Griggs won't like hearing that you interfered with justice. Then maybe you should tell him the truth, Clara shot back, that you tried to steal a horse from an orphaned boy. Pete stalked away, but Owen could see that they'd made an enemy. In a town controlled by corrupt officials, that could be dangerous. The Native American boy approached them shyly. Thank you, he said in accented English. I am called Joseph. My father was Running Bear. I'm Owen, and this is Clara. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? Joseph shook his head. The reservation is far. I was hoping to trade for supplies before winter." Owen and Clara exchanged glances. They were both thinking the same thing. Joseph was vulnerable, and Pete Morrison wasn't the type to forgive and forget. "You can stay at the saloon," Clara said. "Maggie won't like it, but she's got a soft heart under all that bluster." That evening, Owen sat on his bed in the small room above the saloon, studying the pocket watch by lamplight. He'd been in 1873 for 3 weeks now, and he was no closer to understanding how the device worked or how to get home. Worse, he was starting to question whether he wanted to go home at all. Life in Rustwood was hard, but it was also real in a way that his modern existence had never been. Every day brought new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. He'd prevented an innocent person from being lynched, learned skills he never could have imagined needing, and formed friendships that felt more genuine than anything he'd experienced in 2025. But he also knew he didn't belong here. His knowledge of future events gave him an unfair advantage, and his presence might change history in ways he couldn't predict. The responsible thing would be to find a way home as soon as possible. He was still examining the watch when he heard shouting from the street. Owen rushed to the window and saw flames rising from the building across the street, the general store where Joseph had been planning to trade for supplies. "Fire!" someone yelled. "The store's on fire!" Owen grabbed his clothes and ran downstairs, where he found Clara and Maggie organising a bucket brigade. The town had no fire department, so everyone had to pitch in when disaster struck. "Where's Joseph?" Owen asked as he joined the line passing water buckets. "In the store," Clara replied. "He was sleeping in the back room." Without thinking, Owen broke from the line and ran toward the burning building. The front door was blocked by flames, but he remembered seeing a back entrance earlier. He circled around and found it unlocked. The smoke was thick and choking, but Owen pushed through it, calling Joseph's name. He found the boy unconscious near the back wall, overcome by smoke inhalation. Owen hoisted him over his shoulder and carried him outside where Clara and Jed were waiting. "Is he all right?" Clara asked as they laid Joseph on the ground. Owen checked his pulse and breathing. "He's alive, but he needs clean air." He'd learned basic first aid in a modern context, but the principles were the same. He tilted Joseph's head back to open his airway and began rescue breathing. After a few tense minutes, Joseph coughed and opened his eyes. "What happened?" he asked weakly. "Fire," Owen said. "But you're safe now." It wasn't until the flames were finally extinguished that they discovered the truth. The fire had been deliberately set. Someone had poured kerosene around the back of the building and lit it. Joseph had been meant to die in the blaze. "Who would do such a thing?" Maggie asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Pete Morrison," Clara said grimly. "He couldn't stand being shown up in front of the whole town." "Can you prove it?" Jed asked. Owen walked around the charred remains of the building looking for clues. His modern knowledge of forensics was limited, but he understood the basics of fire investigation. The burn pattern clearly showed that the fire had started in multiple places, and the smell of kerosene was still strong in the air. "It was definitely arson," he said, "but proving Pete did it will be harder." "Not if we can find the kerosene can," Clara said. "Pete's not smart enough to dispose of evidence properly." They spent the rest of the night searching the area around the store. Just before dawn, Owen found a partially melted tin can in an alley behind the saloon. It reeked of kerosene and had Pete's initials scratched into the side. "That's evidence," Jed said when Owen showed him the can. "But it won't matter. Sheriff Griggs is in Silas Cade's pocket, and Cade uses Pete and his boys to do his dirty work." Owen felt a familiar surge of anger. In his own time, he'd been powerless against bullies like Brad Hutchins. But here, in 1873, he had knowledge and skills that could make a difference. He wasn't about to let Pete Morrison get away with attempted murder. "What if we don't take this to the sheriff?" he said. "What if we handle it ourselves?" "That's vigilante justice," Jed warned. "It's a dangerous road to go down." "More dangerous than letting Pete burn down buildings with people inside?" Clara put a hand on his arm. "What did you have in mind?" Owen looked around at the faces of his friends, people who'd shown him kindness and accepted him despite his strange origins. They deserved better than to live in fear of corrupt officials and their hired thugs. "I have some ideas," he said, "but I'll need your help." Over the next few days, Owen began to put his plan into motion. He'd realised that his greatest advantage wasn't his knowledge of the future, it was his understanding of technology and science. In 1873, even basic principles of physics and chemistry seemed like magic to most people. He started by building a simple camera using a wooden box, a lens from a broken telescope, and chemicals he mixed from materials available at the general store. Photography was still a new technology, and most people in Rustwood had never seen a camera before. "What's that contraption?" Clara asked as Owen assembled the device. "It's a way to capture images," Owen explained. "Like a painting, but made with light instead of paint." "That's impossible! Watch!" Owen set up the camera and took a photograph of Clara standing in front of the saloon. When he developed the image using a makeshift darkroom in the saloon's basement, she gasped in amazement. "How did you do that?" "Chemistry," Owen said. "Light causes certain chemicals to change colour. If you know how to control the process, you can create permanent images." Word of Owen's magic picture box spread quickly through Rustwood. People came from all over town to see the camera and have their pictures taken. But Owen wasn't just showing off, he was setting up his next move. One evening he approached Jed with a proposal. "I need you to spread the word that I'm going to take a picture of the sunrise tomorrow morning. Make sure Pete Morrison hears about it." "Why?" "Because I'm going to be set up behind the general store and I want Pete to know I'll be there." Jed's eyes narrowed. "That's where you found the kerosene can. You think Pete will come back?" "I think Pete is arrogant enough to believe he can intimidate me into staying quiet. When he shows up, I'll be ready." "This is risky, Owen. What if something goes wrong?" "Then you and Clara will be watching from the saloon roof with a rifle. If Pete tries anything violent, you stop him." The next morning, Owen set up his camera behind the ruins of the general store and waited. He didn't have to wait long. Pete Morrison appeared just as the sun was coming up, flanked by two of his usual cronies. "Well, well," Pete said. "The boy photographer? Heard you've been taking pictures of folks around town?" "That's right," Owen said, not moving from behind his camera. "Speaking of which, would you mind standing right there? The light is perfect." Pete looked suspicious. "What are you up to?" "Just taking pictures, that's what photographers do." Pete moved closer, and Owen triggered the camera's shutter. The flash powder he'd rigged up created a bright burst of light and smoke, startling all three men. "What the hell was that?" one of Pete's cronies yelped. "Just a flash," Owen said innocently. "Helps with the exposure." What Pete didn't know was that Owen had set up multiple cameras at different angles, all triggered by the same mechanism. He'd captured images of Pete and his men at the exact spot where the kerosene can had been found, with the burned remains of the general store clearly visible in the background. "You've got some nerve, boy," Pete said, recovering his composure. "Taking pictures without permission." "I don't need permission to take pictures in a public place," Owen replied. "Though I'm curious why you're so interested in this particular spot." Pete's face darkened. "You know why. You and that saloon girl have been spreading lies about me." "What kind of lies?" "You know what kind. Saying I burned down the store." Owen pretended to be surprised. "Did you burn down the store?" "Of course not." "Then why are you so worried about it?" Pete stepped closer, his hand moving to his gun. "Because lies can ruin a man's reputation, and I don't like people who tell lies about me." "Neither do I," Owen said. "That's why I only deal in facts." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the kerosene can. Pete's eyes went wide when he saw it. "Where did you get that?" "Right here, actually, about 10 feet from where you're standing now." Pete's cronies looked nervous. They clearly hadn't known about the evidence. "That don't prove nothing," Pete said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not by itself," Owen agreed, "but combined with the photographs I just took of you at the scene, and the testimony of witnesses who saw you arguing with Joseph the day before the fire, well, it starts to paint a picture." Pete's hand closed around his gun butt. "You're playing a dangerous game, boy. No more dangerous than burning down buildings with people inside." That's when Jed's voice cut through the morning air. "I'd be real careful about drawing that gun, Pete. You're covered by 3 rifles right now." Pete looked up and saw Jed, Clara and Maggie on the saloon roof, all armed and aimed at him. His cronies immediately stepped away from him, clearly unwilling to get shot for Pete's pride. "This ain't over," Pete snarled. "Yes, it is," Owen said firmly, "because in about an hour I'm going to take these photographs and this evidence to Judge Crawford in the county seat. He's an honest man, and he'll know what to do with them." Pete started to say something else, but one of his cronies grabbed his arm. "Come on, Pete, this isn't worth dying over." They left, but Owen knew the confrontation was far from over. He'd made powerful enemies, and they wouldn't give up easily. That afternoon, Owen, Clara and Jed rode to the county seat to present their evidence to Judge Crawford. The judge was an elderly man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. He studied the photographs and the kerosene can with great interest. "These are remarkable images," he said. "I've never seen photographs of such clarity. How did you create them?" Owen explained his process. emphasizing the scientific principles involved. Judge Crawford was clearly impressed by both the technology and the evidence. "This is compelling proof of arson," the judge said. "I'll issue a warrant for Peter Morrison's arrest immediately." "Will it stick?" Clara asked. "Pete has friends in high places." "Perhaps, but evidence like this is hard to argue with. Whatever happens, Mr. Morrison will face justice for his crimes." On the ride back to Rustwood, Owen felt a sense of satisfaction he'd never experienced before. He'd used his knowledge and skills to protect an innocent person and hold a criminal accountable. It was the first time in his life that he'd felt truly useful, but their victory was short-lived. When they arrived in town, they found Sheriff Griggs waiting for them outside the saloon, along with several armed deputies. "Well, well," Griggs said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Heard you folks took a little trip to see Judge Crawford today." "That's right," Jed said carefully. "What's it to you?" "Just curious about what business you might have had with the judge. You see, I got a telegram from him about an hour ago. Seems someone's been spreading malicious lies about one of our upstanding citizens." Owen felt his stomach drop. Judge Crawford issued a warrant for Pete Morrison's arrest. "Did he now?" Griggs smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, that's interesting, because Pete Morrison was with me all day yesterday, playing cards in my office, got witnesses and everything." "That's impossible," Clara said. "We have photographs." "You have pictures of a man standing in an alley," Griggs interrupted. "Doesn't prove he committed any crime. Could have been taken any time, anywhere." Owen realised they'd underestimated the corruption in Rustwood. Sheriff Griggs wasn't just incompetent, he was actively working to protect Pete Morrison and his other criminal allies. "What do you want?" Owen asked. "Want? I want to maintain peace and order in my town, and right now, that means dealing with troublemakers who go around making false accusations." Griggs stepped closer, his hand resting on his gun. "You've got until sunset to get out of Rustwood. All of you. Anyone who's still here after dark will be arrested for disturbing the peace." "You can't do that," Clara protested. "We live here." "I can do whatever I want, Missy. I'm the law in this town." Jed placed a restraining hand on Owen's arm as the young man started to step forward. "We'll need time to pack," he said diplomatically. "You've got 2 hours," Griggs said. "Don't test me." As the sheriff and his deputies walked away, Owen felt the familiar helplessness that had plagued him in his own time. Once again, bullies were winning while good people suffered. "We can't just run," he said. "What about Joseph? What about everyone else they're terrorizing?" "Sometimes you have to pick your battles," Jed said quietly. "We're outnumbered and outgunned." "In my time, we had a saying," Owen said. "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing." Clara looked at him strangely. "Your time? What do you mean?" Owen realised he'd slipped up, but before he could answer, Joseph appeared around the corner of the saloon. The young man looked desperate. "They took my horse," he said. "Sheriff Griggs said it was evidence in a theft case. But without my horse, I can't get to the reservation before winter." Owen felt something snap inside him. He'd had enough of watching innocent people get hurt while corrupt officials looked the other way. "That's it," he said. "I'm not running anymore." "Owen, be reasonable," Clara said. "What can 3 of us do against the whole town? We don't have to fight the whole town, just the people who are oppressing it." Over the next hour, Owen laid out his plan. It was ambitious, risky, and required precise timing, but it just might work. The key was to turn the town's own systems against the corrupt officials. "You want to do what?" Jed asked when Owen finished explaining. "I want to expose them. Show the whole town what Griggs and his friends are really doing." "And how exactly do you propose to do that?" Owen pulled out the pocket watch his father had left him. "With this, and with every piece of technology I can jury-rig from what's available in 1873. That evening, as the sun set over Rustwood, Owen put his plan into motion. He'd spent the afternoon building what he called a message amplifier, essentially a crude megaphone constructed from a horn-shaped piece of metal and a resonating chamber. He'd also rigged up a series of mirrors that could reflect light from the saloon's windows, creating a primitive but effective signalling system. Most importantly, he'd prepared a collection of his photographs and evidence, along with copies he'd made using his homemade camera. "Are you sure about this?" Clara asked as they made their final preparations. "No," Owen admitted, "but I'm sure about what happens if we don't try." At exactly 9 o'clock, Owen climbed onto the roof of the saloon and began his broadcast. His voice, amplified by the jury-rigged megaphone, carried clearly through the desert air. "People of Rustwood, I have something important to tell you." Lights appeared in windows throughout the town as people emerged to see what was happening. Owen began to display his photographs, using the mirror system to project enlarged images onto the side of the general store. "This is Peter Morrison," he announced, showing the photograph he'd taken that morning. "And this is the evidence that proves he burned down the general store with Joseph running bare inside." A murmur ran through the crowd as people recognised Pete and saw the kerosene can in the photograph. "Sheriff Griggs has been protecting Pete Morrison and other criminals," Owen continued. "He's been taking bribes from Silas Cade to look the other way while innocent people are robbed, beaten and killed." The crowd was growing larger and more restless. Owen could see Sheriff Griggs pushing through the people, his face twisted with rage. "This is all lies," Griggs shouted. "Don't listen to this boy. He's a troublemaker and a criminal." But Owen was ready for that objection. He held up a stack of papers. "These are copies of telegrams I found in the sheriff's office. They show payments from Silas Cade to Marlowe Griggs, along with instructions for which crimes to ignore." The crowd gasped. Owen had actually forged the telegrams using his knowledge of 19th century communication protocols, but they looked authentic enough to fool most people. "How did you get into the sheriff's office?" someone called out. "The same way I got into Silas Cade's house," Owen replied, "and found this." He held up a leather journal, another forgery but an impressive one. "This is Cade's personal record of every bribe he's paid, every election he's rigged, and every crime he's covered up." Sheriff Griggs was almost to the saloon now, his gun drawn. "Enough. You're all under arrest." But the crowd had heard enough. Someone threw a rock and suddenly the mood turned ugly. People began shouting for justice, demanding that Griggs and his deputies put down their weapons. "What's in that journal?" a voice called out. Owen opened the fake journal and began to read from it. "March 15th, 1873. Paid Sheriff Griggs $50 to release Tommy Watson after he was caught stealing cattle. April 2nd. Paid Griggs another $30 to look the other way when Pete Morrison beat up that Mexican family." The crowd roared with anger. Several people Owen recognised as honest citizens began to push forward, demanding to see the evidence for themselves. "This is all fake," Griggs screamed. "None of this is real." "Then why are you so afraid of it?" Owen shot back. "If you're innocent, let Judge Crawford examine the evidence." That's when Silas Cade himself appeared, flanked by armed guards. The land baron was a tall, thin man with cold eyes and an expensive suit that looked out of place in the rough frontier town. "That's enough," Cade said, his voice carrying easily through the crowd. "Sheriff Griggs, arrest these troublemakers immediately." "I don't think so," a new voice said from the crowd. Owen looked down and saw an elderly man with a badge pinned to his vest. "I'm Deputy Marshal Williams from the territorial capital. Judge Crawford sent me to investigate reports of corruption in Rustwood." Owen's heart leaped. He hadn't expected help from outside, but apparently Judge Crawford had taken their evidence more seriously than they'd realised. "Marshal Williams," Cade said smoothly, "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. These people are known troublemakers who've been spreading lies about respected citizens." "That may be," Williams said, "but I'd like to examine this evidence for myself. Young man, would you mind coming down here?" He couldn't abandon her the way his father had, no matter how much he wanted to stay in this simpler, more meaningful world. It was Clara who finally helped him make up his mind. "You're going to leave, aren't you?" she said one evening as they sat by the river outside of town. Owen nodded, unable to speak. "I knew from the first day that you weren't really from the East," Clara continued. "You talk differently, think differently. You know things that haven't been invented yet. Clara, let me finish. I don't know where you're really from, and I don't need to, but I can see that you don't belong here, not really. You're searching for something, just like your father was." Owen found his voice. "I don't want to leave you, any of you. I know, but some journeys you have to take alone." That night Owen sat in his room at the saloon, working on the pocket watch by lamplight. He'd been studying the device for weeks, trying to understand how it worked. The key seemed to be in the combination of the inscribed symbols and the electromagnetic fields generated by the unusual wiring. He'd also been experimenting with the town's telegraph equipment, trying to understand how electromagnetic energy could be manipulated and stored. The telegraph used principles that were related to what he saw in the watch, but on a much simpler scale. After hours of careful work, Owen thought he'd figured out how to activate the device. The inscriptions weren't just decorative, they were a kind of circuit diagram showing how to channel energy through the watch's mechanism. The storm that had brought him to 1873 had provided the initial charge, but he could recreate that effect using the town's electrical systems. The next morning, Owen said his goodbyes. Joseph had already left for the reservation, his horse returned and his future secure. Marshal Williams was establishing a new, honest law enforcement system in Rustwood. The town was healing, becoming the kind of place where good people could live without fear. "You sure about this?" Jed asked as Owen prepared to leave. "No," Owen admitted, "but I'm sure it's what I have to do." He hugged the old gunslinger, then turned to Clara. She looked beautiful in the morning light, her hair blowing in the desert breeze. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked. "I don't know. Time is complicated." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Then I'll just have to hope that time brings you back to me." Owen rode out of Rustwood on the horse Jed had given him, heading north toward the mountains. But he didn't go far. A few miles outside of town, he stopped at a rocky outcropping that provided shelter from the wind and privacy from any observers. He set up the watch's activation sequence using a combination of reflected sunlight and electrical energy, stored in a makeshift battery he'd built from materials scavenged in town. The process was delicate and dangerous. One mistake could destroy the device or worse. As he worked, Owen thought about everything he'd learned during his time in 1873. He discovered courage he didn't know he possessed, formed friendships deeper than any he'd known, and found a sense of purpose that had been missing from his modern life. But he'd also learned that running away from problems didn't solve them. He'd been trying to escape his own time because he felt powerless there, but now he understood that power came from within. The skills and confidence he'd gained in the past would serve him in the future. The watch began to glow with the familiar blue light, and Owen felt the air around him start to shimmer. But before he activated the device, he had one more task to complete. He pulled out a leather journal he'd bought in town and began to write. The message was addressed to Clara, but it was also a record of everything he'd learned and experienced. He wrote about the future, about the changes coming to the world, and about the importance of standing up for what was right. He also wrote about his father, about the clues he'd found, and the search he planned to continue. If Colt Riley was still alive somewhere in time, Owen would find him. When he finished writing, Owen sealed the journal in a waterproof pouch and hid it in a crevice in the rocks. He arranged the hiding place so that it would be protected from the weather but accessible to anyone who knew where to look. Then he carved a message into the rock face, for Clara Bell, with love and gratitude. Owen Riley, 1873. The watch was humming now, its glow intensifying. Owen took one last look at the desert landscape, memorizing every detail. Then he activated the device. The sensation was the same as before, a violent pulling through space and time, reality dissolving into chaos and light. But this time, Owen wasn't afraid. He knew where he was going, and he was ready for whatever came next. He materialized in his grandfather's cabin, exactly where he'd started. The storm had passed, an afternoon. Owen looked around the cabin with new eyes. It was the same place he'd left, but he was different now, stronger, more confident, and with a clear sense of purpose. He gathered up his belongings and prepared to leave, but first he had one more mystery to solve. He remembered Jed's words about his father searching for someone lost in time. What if Colt Riley hadn't just disappeared? What if he'd been travelling through time, searching for his son across different eras? Owen began to examine the cabin more systematically, looking for clues he might have missed before. In a hidden compartment behind the bookshelf, he found a collection of documents that made his heart race. There were photographs dating back to the 1800s, showing a man who looked remarkably like Owen. The same face, the same build, the same intelligent eyes. But the clothes and settings were clearly from different time periods. The Civil War, the California Gold Rush, the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. And in each photograph the man was wearing a pocket watch identical to Owen's. At the bottom of the collection, Owen found a letter addressed to him. The handwriting was his father's, but the ink was old and faded. "Owen," the letter read, "if you're reading this, then you've found the watch and learned to use it. I've been searching for you across time, following clues and hoping to find you before you find me. Time travel is more complicated than I originally thought. Every trip changes things, creates new timelines, new possibilities. I've been to dozens of different eras, and in each one I've left traces of my passage. The cabin is built on the ruins of a town called Rustwood, where I once lived for several years. If you've been there, you'll understand why I couldn't stay. Some journeys have to be made alone. but I want you to know that I never stopped loving you and your mother. Everything I've done has been to protect you both. There's a danger coming, something that threatens not just our family, but all of time itself. I'm working to stop it, but I need your help. If you're ready to continue the search, look for the other watches. There are 12 in total, scattered across different times and places. Only together can they prevent the catastrophe I've seen in the future. I'm proud of you, son. You've grown into the man I always knew you could be. Time will bring us together again. Love, Dad. P.S. Tell Clara Bell I said hello. Owen stared at the letter, his mind reeling. His father was alive, somewhere in time, and there were more watches, more opportunities to travel and explore. But there was also danger, something that threatened the very fabric of reality. He looked at the watch in his hand, understanding now that it was more than just a time machine. It was a key to a larger mystery, a tool in a war that spanned centuries. But first, he had to go home. His mother was waiting, and she deserved to know that her son was safe. He also had to figure out how to use what he'd learned in 1873 to make a difference in his own time. Owen drove back toward town, his mind already working on plans. He would return to school, but he wouldn't be the same quiet, powerless kid who'd left. He would stand up to bullies like Brad Hutchins, using the confidence and skills he'd gained in the past. He would find ways to help people, to make his modern world a little more like the honest, direct world he'd experienced in Rustwood. And when he was ready, he would continue his father's search. There were 11 more watches out there, 11 more chances to make a difference across time. As he pulled into the driveway of his home, Owen saw his mother waiting on the porch. She looked worried but relieved to see him. "Where have you been?" she asked as he got out of the car. "You've been gone for hours." "Just thinking," Owen said, hugging her tight, "about Dad and about the future." "Did you find anything useful in the cabin?" Owen smiled, fingering the watch in his pocket. "Yeah, Mum, I found exactly what I was looking for." That night, Owen sat at his desk, writing in a new journal. He recorded everything he could remember about his time in 1873, every detail that might be important for future reference. He also began to research the other watches, using his computer skills to search historical records for any mention of unusual timepieces or mysterious strangers. But as he worked, his thoughts kept drifting back to Clara Bell. Was she still alive in some other timeline? Had she received his journal and understood its message? Time travel might be possible, but it was also heartbreakingly complicated. A week later, Owen was back in school, but everything had changed. When Brad Hutchins tried to shove him into a locker, Owen simply stepped aside and let the bigger boy stumble into the metal door. "What's your problem, freak?" Brad snarled, rubbing his bruised shoulder. "My problem," Owen said calmly, "is that I don't have time for bullies anymore. I've got more important things to do." There was something in his voice, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Brad looked uncertain for the first time since Owen had known him. "You think you're tough now?" Brad asked. "I think I'm useful," Owen replied. "And that's more important than being tough." Word spread quickly through the school that Owen Riley had somehow found his backbone. But he didn't stop there. He started a computer club that taught kids how to repair and modify electronics. He volunteered at the local community centre, teaching elderly residents how to use modern technology. He even convinced the school to start a peer mediation program, using his newfound understanding of human nature to help resolve conflicts. But at night, alone in his room, Owen continued his research. He'd found references to unusual watches in historical documents from the American Revolution, the Roman Empire, and even ancient Egypt. Each one was associated with a mysterious stranger who appeared suddenly, made a significant impact on events, and then vanished without a trace. His father was out there somewhere, moving through time and trying to prevent some unknown catastrophe, and Owen was determined to find him. 3 months after his return from 1873, Owen made a discovery that changed everything. While researching property records, he found that the land where his grandfather's cabin stood had been purchased in 1890 by a man named C. Riley. The same year his father had supposedly written the letter Owen found in the cabin. But according to the records, C. Riley had built the cabin on the ruins of a town called Rustwood, and hidden in the basement of the cabin was a safe that had been installed in 1890, decades before Owen's grandfather had ever lived there. Owen raced back to the cabin, his heart pounding with excitement and fear. If his father had been to 1890, he might have left more clues, more instructions for the journey ahead. The safe was hidden behind a false wall in the basement, exactly where the records indicated it would be. Owen had to use his electronic skills to crack the combination, but eventually the heavy door swung open. Inside, he found a second letter from his father, along with a map showing the locations of the other watches. But most importantly, he found a small leather pouch containing a folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, Owen opened the paper. It was a note written in a familiar feminine script. "Owen, your journal reached me safely. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right person to pass it on to. I lived a good life, fought for what was right, and never forgot the boy from nowhere who taught me that the future could be better than the past. The watch you seek is in the courthouse clock tower, where I hid it before I died. Use it wisely, and remember that love transcends time. Clara Bell Morgan, 1924. Owen stared at the note, tears streaming down his face. Clara had lived for 51 years after he'd left her, and she'd never forgotten him. She'd kept his journal, preserved his message, and even helped him continue his quest. He looked up at the ceiling of the cabin, imagining the woman who'd once lived above these very ruins. She was gone now, had been gone for decades, but her spirit lived on in the words she'd left for him. "Thank you, Clara," he whispered, "for everything." Owen knew now that his journey was just beginning. There were more watches to find, more times to visit, and a father to rescue. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. Across time and space, he was connected to people who shared his vision of a better world. People like Clara Bell, Jed Hollows, and even his mysterious father. The boy from nowhere had become the man from everywhere, and time itself was his frontier. The oscilloscope's amber screen flickered in the dim garage light, casting ghostly shadows across Noah Cross's angular face. At 17, he possessed the kind of restless intelligence that made teachers uncomfortable and classmates distant. While other kids his age were planning prom or worrying about college applications, Noah spent his nights elbow-deep in salvaged electronics, surrounded by the metallic bones of decommissioned military equipment he'd rescued from scrapyards across New Mexico. His mother's Honda pulled into the driveway with its familiar wheeze, signalling the end of another 12-hour shift at Presbyterian Hospital. Sarah Cross emerged looking exhausted, her scrubs wrinkled and her auburn hair escaping its ponytail. She paused at the garage entrance, watching her son's silhouette hunched over his latest project. "You're going to electrocute yourself one of these days," she said, though her voice carried more resignation than real concern. She'd given up trying to drag him away from his experiments years ago. "I'm being careful, Mum." Noah didn't look up from the oscilloscope's guts, where he was methodically replacing burnt capacitors with modern equivalents. "This baby's from 1962, military grade. They don't make them like this anymore." Sarah shook her head and disappeared into the house. Noah had always been different, reading quantum mechanics textbooks at 12, building radio receivers from spare parts at 14. The other military brats at school called him weird, but Noah preferred the company of electrons and magnetic fields to teenage drama anyway. The oscilloscope had been his best find yet, pulled from a pile of junk at Sanchez Salvage outside Santa Fe. The old man behind the counter had barely glanced at it when Noah offered $20, muttering something about old DARPA crap under his breath. What Sanchez didn't know, what Noah didn't know either, was that this particular piece of equipment had once been part of something called Project Kronos, a classified quantum resonance experiment that had been hastily shuttered in 1963 after producing results that terrified even its creators. For 3 weeks, Noah had been rebuilding the machine's internal architecture, integrating it with his custom-built Tesla coil and a high-frequency generator he'd assembled from marine radio parts. The fusion of 1960s military precision with modern amateur engineering created something that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, pregnant with the kind of electrical violence that New Mexico summers delivered with biblical fury. Noah glanced at his phone. 11:47 p.m. Perfect timing. He needed the atmospheric disturbance to test his theory about electromagnetic resonance patterns. As if summoned by his thoughts, the first crack of thunder split the night. Lightning strobed through the garage windows, and Noah felt the familiar electric tingle that preceded a major storm. He flipped the power switch on his jury-rigged apparatus, watching voltage readings climb on the digital multimeter he'd wired into the system. The oscilloscope screen came alive with dancing waveforms, complex interference patterns that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Noah fine-tuned the frequency generator, chasing a harmonic sweet spot he'd calculated but never achieved. The Tesla coil hummed with increasing intensity, its copper windings glowing faintly in the darkness. Then he heard it, a voice emerging from the static of his old radio, words bleeding through from some distant transmission. Eagle Squadron reporting heavy resistance over Hamburg. Repeat, heavy resistance. The voice carried the crisp, urgent tone of a military radio operator, but the accent was wrong, the phrasing too formal for modern communications. Noah frowned, adjusting the radio's frequency dial. The voice strengthened. Coordinates confirmed. Proceed to target Alpha 7. Static swallowed the transmission, then spit out fragments. God help us all. Lightning struck somewhere close, the thunder arriving almost instantaneously. In that same moment, Noah's equipment reached critical resonance. The oscilloscope screen exploded with impossible geometries, waveforms that seemed to fold in on themselves like origami made of pure energy. The Tesla coil's hum became a scream, and the air itself began to taste metallic. What happened next defied every law of physics that Noah understood. The space around the oscilloscope began to warp, reality bending like heated glass. A darkness opened in the centre of the distortion, not the mere absence of light, but something that hurt to look at directly, a tiny wound in the fabric of space-time itself. Noah reached for the power switch, but the magnetic field had become so intense that his tools were flying toward the anomaly like iron filings toward a magnet. The radio's static crescendoed into a banshee wail, and that impossible voice from the past shouted clearly through the chaos. Trinity test confirmed! The gadget works! God forgive us! The garage tilted, or maybe Noah tilted. The world became a kaleidoscope of spinning tools and sparking electronics, and then the darkness swallowed everything with the sound of reality tearing like wet fabric. Consciousness returned in pieces, the taste of copper pennies, the smell of sage and dust, the sensation of grit against his cheek. Noah opened his eyes to find himself face down in a red desert sand, his body aching as if he'd been thrown from a moving car. The familiar weight of his smartphone pressed against his thigh, and his garage-stained t-shirt and jeans felt alien against the profound silence of the wilderness. He pushed himself upright, squinting against sunlight that seemed wrong somehow, too yellow, too clean. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by distant mesas and the occasional scrub brush. There was no sign of his garage, his house, or even the storm that had been raging moments before. Panic clawed at his chest as he checked his phone. No signal. The date read July 15th, but the year displayed as 1943. Noah stared at the screen, certain it was malfunctioning, until he noticed something else. The device's GPS showed his location as approximately 30 miles northwest of a place called Los Alamos, New Mexico. The name triggered something in his memory, a fragment from the history books he'd devoured during his obsession with Cold War technology. Los Alamos, 1943, the Manhattan Project, the secret city where America built the atomic bomb. A dust cloud on the horizon resolved into a military jeep, its olive-drab paint job and angular design distinctly different from modern vehicles. Noah stood frozen as the vehicle approached, his mind racing through possible explanations that didn't involve time travel, because time travel was impossible, wasn't it? The jeep screeched to a halt 50 yards away, and two soldiers emerged with their rifles raised. Their uniforms were museum pieces, wool garrison caps, canvas gaiters, and the kind of equipment pouches that belonged in old war movies. But the weapons they carried were real enough, and the suspicion in their eyes was contemporary to any era. Halt! Identify yourself. The taller soldier's voice cracked slightly, betraying his youth despite his authoritative tone. Noah raised his hands, his engineer's mind cataloguing details even through his terror. The soldiers' uniforms bore insignia he recognized from historical documentaries, the distinctive patch of the Manhattan Engineer District. The younger soldier couldn't have been more than 19, his face sunburned and serious beneath his cap. "I'm Noah Cross," he managed, his voice hoarse from breathing desert dust. "I think I'm lost." The soldiers exchanged glances. The older one, a sergeant by his stripes, stepped closer while keeping his rifle trained on Noah's chest. "Lost?" He looked pointedly at Noah's modern clothing, the synthetic fabric and machine-stitched seams that wouldn't be invented for decades. "Son, you're about as lost as a person can get. This is a restricted military zone." They searched him with professional efficiency, confiscating his phone. What the hell is this thing? His wallet, and the small multi-tool he always carried. Noah's driver's license sparked particular interest. The laminated plastic, the holographic security features, and the issuing date of 2024 caused confused murmurs between the soldiers. The ride to the military checkpoint passed in surreal silence. Noah squeezed between two armed guards in the back of the jeep. The landscape looked familiar, yet alien. The same red rocks and endless sky he'd known all his life, but somehow cleaner, emptier, as if the world were holding its breath. The checkpoint itself was a collection of temporary buildings surrounded by barbed wire and serious-looking sentries. Noah was processed with military efficiency, fingerprinted, photographed, and subjected to an interrogation that began politely but grew increasingly intense as his story proved impossible to verify. "Let me get this straight," said Lieutenant Morrison, the intelligence officer who'd taken over the questioning. He was young for his rank, with the kind of pale complexion that suggested too many hours spent indoors with classified documents. "You claim to be from Albuquerque, but we can't verify your address. Your identification card is made from materials we've never seen, issued by a department that doesn't exist, and you were found wandering in a restricted area with no memory of how you got there." Noah stuck to the story he'd hastily constructed. Amnesia from a car accident, possible head trauma, confusion about dates and locations. It was thin, but anything approaching the truth would have them convinced he was either insane or an enemy agent. "The thing is," Morrison continued, leaning back in his metal chair, "we've been having some unusual reports lately. Strange lights in the sky, electromagnetic disturbances. Some of the eggheads think the Germans might be testing some new kind of weapon. Makes us jumpy about unexplained visitors." Before Noah could respond, the interrogation room door opened, and a man in civilian clothes entered. He was perhaps 40, with prematurely grey hair and the kind of intense, analytical gaze that Noah recognised in fellow science enthusiasts. The man glanced at Noah's file, then studied Noah himself with unconcealed curiosity. "Dr. Walter Irwin," the man introduced himself, extending a hand that Noah shook automatically. "I'm one of the physicists working on the project here. Lieutenant Morrison thought I might want to speak with you." Dr. Irwin settled into a chair across from Noah, his manner more collegial than interrogative. "I've been reading your statements. You mentioned being interested in electronics, electromagnetic theory. Tell me, what do you know about quantum mechanics?" The question was clearly a test, but Noah couldn't help himself. Despite the impossible circumstances, the prospect of discussing physics with a real scientist was irresistible. "Well, I've read about wave-particle duality, quantum superposition, the uncertainty principle, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Einstein's objections to quantum entanglement." Dr. Irwin's eyebrows rose with each reference. In 1943, quantum mechanics was still cutting-edge science, discussed mainly in academic circles and classified research programs. For a teenager, especially one found wandering in the desert, to speak so knowledgeably about such advanced concepts was unprecedented. "Fascinating," Dr. Irwin murmured. "And what's your opinion on the practical applications of quantum theory? Theoretical, of course." Noah felt like a student stumbling through an exam he hadn't studied for, except the subject matter was the fundamental nature of reality itself. I think we're only beginning to understand the implications. Quantum tunneling, for instance, or the possibility that observation affects reality at the subatomic level. It could revolutionize everything from computing to energy production." The room fell silent. Dr. Irwin and Lieutenant Morrison exchanged a look that Noah couldn't interpret, but he sensed he'd said something significant, possibly dangerously so. "Mr. Cross," Dr. Irwin said finally, "I'm going to make a recommendation that might sound unusual. We have a shortage of qualified personnel here, particularly bright young minds who understand advanced physics. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you a position as a junior research assistant. It would solve your immediate problem of having nowhere to go, and it would allow us to keep an eye on you while we verify your background." Noah's heart hammered against his ribs. A position at Los Alamos in 1943 meant working on the Manhattan Project, helping to build the weapons that would end World War II and usher in the atomic age. The moral implications were staggering, but what choice did he have? Refusing would only deepen their suspicions, and he needed time to figure out how to return to his own era. "I'd be honoured to help however I can," he said, hoping his voice sounded steadier than he felt. The temporary quarters they assigned him were Spartan but comfortable. A narrow bed, a small desk, and a window that looked out over the sprawling complex of laboratories and living spaces that made up the secret city. Noah lay awake that first night, staring at stars that seemed brighter and more numerous than the ones he remembered, wondering if he was going insane or if he'd somehow stumbled into the greatest scientific adventure in human history. His first day of work began before dawn with a security briefing that emphasised the absolute necessity of discretion. The project was compartmentalised, with each worker knowing only what they needed to complete their specific tasks. Noah was assigned to the electronics division, where his job involved calibrating sensitive measuring instruments and maintaining the complex array of equipment needed for the scientists' experiments. The work was fascinating despite his limited access to information. He found himself surrounded by technology that was advanced for 1943, but primitive by the standards of his own time. Vacuum tube computers the size of refrigerators, mechanical calculators that clicked and whirred through complex equations, and electromagnetic devices that seemed to bend the laws of physics through brute force rather than elegant engineering. It was during his second week that he first encountered Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer himself. The scientific director of the project was younger than Noah had expected from photographs, but he possessed an intensity that made the air around him seem to vibrate with barely contained energy. Oppenheimer moved through the laboratories like a force of nature, discussing quantum theory in one breath and Sanskrit poetry in the next. "You're the young man Walter's been telling me about," Oppenheimer said when Dr. Irwin introduced them. His pale blue eyes seemed to look straight through Noah, as if he could read the secrets written on his soul, the one with the interesting perspectives on electromagnetic theory. Noah mumbled something appropriately modest while trying not to stare at the man who would become known as the father of the atomic bomb. The encounter lasted only a few minutes, but it left him shaken. This wasn't history anymore. These were real people making real decisions that would reshape the world. The moral weight of his situation hit him fully during a conversation with Eva Stein, a young woman who worked as a laboratory assistant in the chemistry division. She was perhaps 22, with dark hair pinned back severely and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. Eva had fled Nazi Germany in 1938, leaving behind family members who had since disappeared into the horror of the Holocaust. "They have my parents," she told Noah one evening as they shared coffee in the mess hall. "My younger brother too. The letters stopped coming last year." Her voice was steady, but Noah could see the carefully controlled grief in the set of her shoulders. "Every day I work here, I tell myself that what we're building will end this war faster, maybe save people like them." Noah wanted to tell her the truth, that her family was likely already dead, that the bombs they were building would kill hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians, that the war would end in August, but the nuclear age would bring its own terrors. Instead, he listened and nodded, and felt the weight of forbidden knowledge settle on his chest like a stone. Eva was too observant for her own good. Within a few weeks, she began asking pointed questions about Noah's background, his education, his mysterious appearance in the desert. She noticed inconsistencies in his story, anachronisms in his speech, and the way he sometimes seemed to know things he shouldn't. "You're not who you say you are," she confronted him one evening as they walked between the laboratory buildings. The New Mexico sky blazed with stars unmarked by light pollution, and the air carried the scent of sage and the faint ozone smell of high-voltage experiments. "Your accent isn't quite right for New Mexico. Your clothes, when they brought you in, the fabric was like nothing I've seen. And yesterday, when Dr. Fermi was discussing neutron bombardment, you started to say something about enrichment cascades before you caught yourself." Noah's blood turned to ice water. Uranium enrichment cascades were a theoretical concept in 1943, not yet implemented in the massive facilities at Oak Ridge. His knowledge of the process came from textbooks written decades in the future. "I don't know what you mean," he said, but Eva stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "I think you do. The question is whether you're a German spy with access to intelligence we don't know about, or something else entirely." She paused, then added quietly, "There's something about you that doesn't fit in this time." The phrase hit Noah like a physical blow. He stopped walking, staring at her in the starlight. "This time?" Eva's expression softened slightly. "My grandmother used to tell stories about people who slipped between moments, who fell through cracks in the world. I always thought they were just stories." She reached out and touched his arm gently. "But then I met you. Standing there in the desert night, surrounded by the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century, working to unlock the secrets of the atom, Noah made a decision that would change everything." He told Eva the truth. Not all of it at first. Just fragments, pieces of an impossible story about oscilloscopes and time rifts, and accidentally discovering that the boundaries between past and future were more fragile than anyone imagined. Eva listened without interruption, her scientist mind analysing and cataloguing, even as her human heart struggled to accept what she was hearing. "Show me," she said finally. "If what you're saying is true, show me proof." Noah led her to his quarters and retrieved the items the security personnel had returned to him: his wallet, his phone, his multi-tool. Under the light of a table lamp, Eva examined each object with forensic attention. The synthetic materials, the manufacturing precision, the electronic components that wouldn't be invented for decades, all of it pointed to a technology base far beyond 1943. When Noah powered on his phone and showed her the stored photographs from his own time, images of modern Albuquerque, of the Los Alamos National Laboratory as it would exist in the 21st century, Eva's scientific skepticism finally crumbled. "Mein Gott," she whispered, scrolling through pictures of a world she would never live to see. "It's real. You're really from... When did you say... Ixas onesibse?" "I didn't plan this," Noah said urgently. "I was just experimenting with electromagnetic resonance, and something went wrong. I need to get back, but I need equipment I can't access, and knowledge I'm not supposed to have." Eva was quiet for a long time, studying his face in the lamplight. Finally she asked, "In your time, do we win the war?" "Yes, but the cost." Noah struggled with how much to reveal. "The bombs we're building here, they work. They end the war in August 1945, but they also kill hundreds of thousands of people in Japan, and they start an arms race that brings the world to the brink of destruction multiple times. And if we don't build them, I don't know, maybe Germany develops them first. Maybe the war drags on for years longer, and millions more die in conventional fighting. History is complicated." Eva nodded slowly. "Then we continue the work. But we also get you home." She looked at him with new determination. "What do you need?" The answer was both simple and impossibly complex. Noah needed to recreate the conditions that had brought him to 1943, the specific electromagnetic resonance frequency, the quantum interference pattern, and most critically, a massive energy source to power the dimensional rift. The problem was that two of those three requirements involved classified materials and equipment that were under constant guard. For 2 weeks they planned in whispered conversations and stolen moments between work shifts. Eva used her access to the chemistry labs to identify potential sources of the materials they needed, while Noah designed modifications to existing equipment that might generate the necessary quantum field resonance. Their planning was complicated by the growing suspicions of Frank Kessler, a junior physicist whose professional jealousy had been kindled by Noah's rapid integration into the project. Kessler had noticed the attention Dr. Irwin paid to Noah's insights, the way senior scientists sometimes paused to listen when Noah offered suggestions. More dangerously, he'd begun asking questions about Noah's background and qualifications. "There's something off about that kid," Kessler complained to anyone who would listen. "He shows up out of nowhere with no verifiable credentials, and suddenly he's offering advice to Oppenheimer himself. Mark my words, he's not what he seems." The situation came to a head on the evening of July 14th, just as Noah and Eva were preparing to attempt their escape. Kessler had spent weeks gathering what he considered evidence of Noah's suspicious nature, his mysterious arrival, his advanced knowledge, the inconsistencies in his personal history. That night, he presented his findings to Army intelligence. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Security personnel searched Noah's quarters, analysed his possessions, and subjected him to intense questioning that grew more hostile by the hour. The phone, with its impossible technology, was all the proof they needed that Noah was hiding something significant. "Son," said Colonel Patterson, the security chief who'd taken over the case, "I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this." He held up Noah's smartphone, its sleek design and advanced materials utterly alien in the 1940s environment. "This device contains technology that's decades ahead of anything we've developed. The only question is whether you're working for the Germans, the Russians, or someone else entirely." Noah tried to maintain his cover story, but it was collapsing under the weight of physical evidence and mounting suspicion. They knew he wasn't who he claimed to be. The only question was what they would do about it. The answer came at dawn on July 15th, when Colonel Patterson informed him that he was being transferred to a more secure facility for enhanced interrogation. The implication was clear. They would use whatever methods necessary to extract the truth from him, and given the stakes of the Manhattan Project, those methods would not be gentle. It was Eva who provided the solution. Using her security clearance and knowledge of the facility's layout, she created a diversion that would give them one chance to escape, but only if they acted during the Trinity test itself, when attention would be focused on the world's first atomic bomb detonation. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. The Trinity test was scheduled for 5:30 a.m. on July 16th, just hours away. The massive electrical systems used to trigger the bomb's detonation would create electromagnetic interference across the entire region, perfect cover for the kind of quantum resonance experiment they needed to perform. Eva had managed to smuggle key components from various laboratories, high-voltage capacitors, resonance coils, and most crucially, a small sample of enriched uranium that would provide the quantum instability necessary to punch through the dimensional barrier. They would use the high-voltage testing chamber in Lab 7, timing their experiment to coincide with the Trinity detonation. "If your theory is correct," Eva said as they made final preparations in the pre-dawn darkness, "the atomic blast will provide enough energy to reopen the temporal rift. But Noah," she paused, her hand on his arm, "if you're wrong, we'll both be vaporized along with everything else in this desert." Noah looked at her in the dim light, this remarkable woman who had risked everything to help him return to a future she would never see. "Come with me," he said impulsively. "I don't know if it's possible, but—" Eva shook her head. "This is my time. I war. I have work to finish here." She pressed something into his hands, a small silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. "But perhaps something of me can make the journey with you." They entered Lab 7 through a service tunnel that Eva had scouted weeks earlier, emerging into the high-voltage testing chamber where massive electrical equipment hummed with barely contained power. Noah worked with desperate efficiency, connecting his improvised quantum resonance device to the lab's electrical systems while Eva monitored for security patrols. Outside, the pre-dawn sky was beginning to lighten. In a bunker 20 miles away, scientists and military personnel were making final preparations to witness humanity's first glimpse of atomic fire. Noah's hand shook as he made the final connections, knowing that in a few minutes the course of human history would change forever. At 5:29 a.m., alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Someone had discovered their absence, and security teams were sweeping the complex. Eva barricaded the laboratory door while Noah powered up his equipment, watching voltage readings climb toward the critical threshold. 30 seconds to Trinity, Eva reported, monitoring a radio she'd brought to track the countdown. "Noah, whatever happens, I want you to know—" Her words were cut off by the sound of soldiers shouting outside the laboratory. Security personnel had found them. 10 seconds, Noah whispered, his hand hovering over the activation switch. Through the laboratory's small window he could see the distant Jornada del Muerto desert where history was about to be made. The world went white. For an instant that lasted eternity, Noah experienced the birth of the atomic age as pure energy. The Trinity bomb's detonation 20 miles away registered as a pressure wave that seemed to compress time itself, while his quantum resonance device screamed to life in sympathetic response. Reality folded inward like origami made of light and impossible mathematics. He felt Eva's hand in his as the dimensional rift opened, not the tiny wound in space-time that had brought him to 1943, but a vast tunnel of swirling energy that stretched between moments. The laboratory around them dissolved into constituent atoms, then reformed as something else entirely. The transition felt like drowning in reverse, a sensation of being pulled up through layers of compressed time until he burst through the surface of the present, gasping and disoriented. Noah found himself lying on the concrete floor of his garage, surrounded by the familiar clutter of his electronics workshop. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, but wrong in subtle ways that made his skin crawl. The oscilloscope that had started his journey sat on the workbench, but now it bore the faint inscription JRO 1943 etched into its metal housing. His radio, previously tuned to a local rock station, was picking up what sounded like a big band number from the 1940s. Noah staggered to his feet, his mind reeling from the transition. Outside, dawn was breaking over familiar mountains, but the light seemed different, cleaner somehow, as if the world had been subtly retuned while he was away. He stumbled into the house, finding his mother already gone for her morning shift at the hospital. It wasn't until he walked to school that the changes became apparent. The building was the same, but the name carved into the stone facade now read Eva Stein Memorial High School. Inside, a bronze plaque near the main office commemorated an anonymous contributor to the Manhattan Project, whose sacrifice advanced the cause of freedom. Noah stood before the plaque for a long time, reading and rereading the dedication that mentioned a young German refugee who had died in a laboratory accident during the final days of the war. The official story was sanitized, bureaucratic, but Noah could read between the lines. Eva had stayed behind, continuing her work on the project that would end the war and reshape the world. The final confirmation came when he arrived home that afternoon to find a package waiting on his doorstep. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, was Eva's grandmother's locket, the same one she had pressed into his hands moments before their escape attempt. A note written in Eva's careful handwriting accompanied it. "My dear Noah, if you're reading this, then you made it back safely, and time has found a way to complete our circle. I wanted you to know that I survived the laboratory accident that the official reports describe, though I was never able to explain the miraculous escape that saved my life. I went on to work on peaceful applications of atomic energy, always remembering the young man from the future who showed me that science must be tempered with wisdom. The locket has waited 60 years to find you again. Perhaps now you understand that some journeys through time are meant to bring us home to who we were always supposed to become." E.S. 1983. Noah clutched the locket, feeling the weight of decades and the warmth of a friendship that had transcended time itself. He had returned to his own era, but the experience had changed him in ways he was still discovering. The burden of knowledge he carried, about the future consequences of the atomic age, about the moral complexities of scientific progress, would shape every decision he made going forward. That evening, he stood in his garage workshop, staring at the oscilloscope that had started his incredible journey. The machine hummed quietly, its screens dark and peaceful. Noah reached for the power switch, then stopped. The temptation to experiment further, to explore other moments in history, was almost overwhelming. Instead, he walked outside into the New Mexico night. Rain was falling, gentle and warm, and in the distance lightning played across the mountains where Los Alamos National Laboratory continued its work into the 21st century. Noah tilted his face to the sky, feeling the electric potential in the air, and made his choice. Some doors, once opened, should remain closed. Some knowledge was too dangerous to pursue, no matter how alluring the mysteries it might reveal. He had been given a glimpse behind the curtain of time itself, had walked among the giants who shaped the modern world, and had learned that the past was both more fragile and more resilient than he had ever imagined. The locket around his neck caught the light from a distant street lamp, a silver reminder that some connections transcend the boundaries of space and time. Eva Stein had chosen to stay in her moment of history, to face the consequences of the atomic age with courage and wisdom. Now it was Noah's turn to find his place in the world, armed with the knowledge that the future was not fixed, that individual choices mattered, and that the responsibility to use knowledge wisely was the greatest burden and privilege that any scientist could bear. As he stood there in the rain, watching lightning dance across the sky, Noah Cross understood that his real journey was just beginning. The boy who had accidentally torn a hole in time had returned as a young man who understood the weight of temporal responsibility. Whatever came next, he would face it with the wisdom Eva had given him, and the understanding that some adventures were meant to change not the world, but the adventurer himself. The oscilloscope in his garage would remain forever silent, its quantum secrets locked away. But the echo of his journey through time would ripple forward through every choice he made, every life he touched, and every moment when he chose wisdom over knowledge and responsibility over power. In the end, that was the most profound discovery of all, that the greatest experiments were not with the fabric of space-time, but with the limitless potential of the human spirit to grow, to learn, and to become something greater than what it was before. The aurora blazed across the Los Angeles sky like digital fire, streaks of green and violet that shouldn't have existed this far south. Ethan Reyes adjusted his jury-rigged VR headset one more time, the solar panels he'd grafted onto its sides catching the last rays of October sunlight filtering through the eucalyptus trees of Griffith Park. His phone was propped against a rock, live streaming to maybe 12 people who cared about his quantum gaming revolution project. "Okay, chat, we're about to push this thing to 11, he said, voice crackling with nervous energy. Solar batteries at 96%, geomagnetic readings are off the charts, and he squinted at his smartwatch. Holy shit, the magnetometer's going crazy. This storm's hitting harder than predicted. The headset's weight felt familiar on his skull, cables snaking down to the makeshift battery pack at his waist. Months of salvaged electronics, YouTube tutorials, and stubborn determination had led to this moment. While his classmates were grinding through senior year applications, Ethan was trying to crack the code of consciousness itself, or at least build something cool enough to go viral. Initiating full-spectrum neural mapping in 3, 2... The world exploded into kaleidoscopic fragments. Colours that had no names shrieked across his vision as every nerve ending caught fire. The aurora above seemed to reach down with crackling fingers, and Ethan felt himself falling through dimensions of light and time, his scream lost in a cosmic wind that tasted of ozone and eternity, then darkness, then cold, then the gentle slap of waves against his face. Ethan's eyes fluttered open to find himself sprawled on wet sand beneath a canopy of unfamiliar stars. The aurora was gone, replaced by a moon so bright it cast sharp shadows across pristine beach. His VR headset lay in pieces nearby, circuits still sparking feebly. The air smelled of salt and rotting seaweed, but underneath that was something else, an absence of the petroleum and exhaust that always lingered in LA's atmosphere. His smartwatch face was cracked but still functional, showing 11:47 p.m. The date read October 15th, but the year display flickered between 2020 and something impossible, 1716. What the actual... Well, what have we here? Ethan jerked upright to find 3 men standing over him, their silhouettes outlined against the star-drunk sky. Tricorn hats, loose-fitting shirts, and the unmistakable glint of cutlass steel. His brain, still reeling from whatever had happened, tried to process this information and failed spectacularly. "Looks like a survivor from that sloop we spotted breaking up on the reef," said one of them, his voice carrying a strange accent. Part English, part something Caribbean. Fancy clothes, though, silk by the feel of it. Another man, broader and more scarred, spat into the sand near Ethan's feet. Could be Spanish, could be valuable, could be trouble. Only one way to find out. The third man, younger than the others, extended a hand. "On your feet, lad. Captain'll want words with you." Ethan's hand moved instinctively to his phone, but found only empty pocket. He looked around frantically until he spotted it half buried in sand, its cracked screen dark. When he reached for it, the youngest pirate, because these were definitely pirates, his mind finally admitted, grabbed his wrist. "Careful now. What's this curious thing?" The man lifted the phone, turning it over in his hands. "Some manner of spyglass? The craftsmanship is peculiar. It's Ethan's voice cracked. "It's a navigation device. Very advanced. Very expensive." The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "You speak strangely, boy. Where are you from?" Before Ethan could concoct an answer, torchlight flickered through the palm trees behind them. More voices, more footsteps. The beach suddenly felt very small and very exposed. "Silas, Tomas, what's the delay?" The voice that cut through the night air belonged to a woman, commanding and sharp. "The tide turns in an hour. and I'll not have the Stormcrow caught in these shallows because you three decided to play with beach refuse." The woman who emerged from the tree line stood barely 5.5 feet tall, but carried herself like she owned every grain of sand beneath her boots. Dark hair was braided with bits of bone and coloured thread, and her coat, a deep blue thing that might once have belonged to a naval officer, hung open to reveal a brace of pistols across her chest. Most striking were her eyes, pale green and sharp enough to cut glass. "Captain Vane," said the youngest pirate, Thomas. "Found this one washed up with wreckage from that Dutch sloop. Claims his bauble here is some sort of navigation aid." Captain Vane's gaze moved from Ethan's face to his clothes, the synthetic fibres of his gaming hoodie, the complex weave of his jeans, the rubber soles of his sneakers. Her expression shifted from annoyance to curiosity. "Navigation, you say?" She plucked the phone from Tomas's grip and examined it more closely. The glass is remarkably clear. The craftsmanship ... She looked up at Ethan. "What's your name, boy?" "Ethan? Ethan Reyes. Spanish blood, then. But your accent." She circled him slowly, predator-like. "Where did you learn to speak English so cleanly? And where did you acquire clothes of such unusual make?" Ethan's mind raced. He'd read enough fantasy novels to know that claiming to be from the future was a quick path to accusations of madness or sorcery. Neither seemed like good career moves when surrounded by armed pirates. "I'm a scholar," he said carefully, "from a distant university. I was aboard a research vessel studying celestial navigation when the storm hit." "A scholar," Captain Vane's smile was sharp. "How fortunate. The Stormcrow has need of men with learning." She turned to the scarred pirate. "Silas, what think you?" Silas spat again. "I think he's too clean to have been in any shipwreck, and his kit's too fine for any honest scholar. Could be a spy, could be bait. Either way, he's trouble we don't need. Perhaps, or perhaps he's exactly what fate has provided." Vane handed the phone back to Ethan. "Tell me, scholar, can you read the stars?" Ethan glanced up at the alien constellations above them. But they weren't alien, he realised. They were simply the same stars he'd known all his life, viewed from a different latitude and without the light pollution of modern civilization. The Big Dipper hung low on the horizon, and Polaris glittered like a diamond in the north. "Yes," he said, "I can read them. And can you chart a course by them?" This was dangerous territory. Ethan knew the basics of celestial navigation from astronomy classes and Wikipedia binges, but theory and practice were very different things. Still, it seemed like his best chance of not ending up as shark food. With the proper instruments, yes. Captain Vane studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, Ethan Reyes. You'll come aboard the Stormcrow as our navigator, prove useful, and you'll earn your share like any other member of my crew. Prove otherwise." She let the implication hang in the salt air. "What if I refuse? Then Silas gets his wish, and you remain here on this beach, permanently." Her hand rested casually on the butt of one pistol. "The choice is yours, scholar." Ethan looked around at the empty beach, then at the dense jungle beyond. He had no idea where he was, when he was, or how he'd gotten here. But these people had a ship, which meant they had food, water, and most importantly, mobility. His best chance of figuring out what had happened, and how to get home, lay with them. "I accept." The Stormcrow proved to be a sleek brigantine anchored in a sheltered cove, her twin masts rising like spears against the starfield. As the longboat approached her hull, Ethan could make out carved decorations along her rails and the gleam of bronze cannons in her ports. She was beautiful in the way that all dangerous things were beautiful. Elegant, deadly, and utterly unforgiving of mistakes. The next weeks passed in a blur of rope burns, seasickness, and hard-won education in the realities of 18th century piracy. Thomas, despite being only 11 years old, proved an invaluable guide to shipboard life. The boy had grown up on these decks after being orphaned in Port Royal, and his quick wit and street-smart humour made him Ethan's first real friend among the crew. "Keep your head down, speak when spoken to, and never show fear," Thomas whispered, as he taught Ethan to tie proper knots. "Captain Vane's fair but hard. She'll give you every chance to prove yourself, but cross her or show cowardice, and you'll find yourself swimming home." Dr. Adelina Montserrat, the ship's surgeon, presented a different challenge. A woman in her late 20s with intelligent dark eyes and steady hands, she watched Ethan with the focused attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Her medical knowledge was impressive for the era, but when Ethan carelessly mentioned the concept of antiseptics during a conversation about treating wounds, her interest became almost predatory. "You speak of invisible creatures that cause infection," she said one evening as she tended to a sailor's infected cut. "This is not theory I have encountered in any medical text. It's a new idea from the universities in the north." Ethan watched as she cleaned the wound with rum, wincing at the waste of good alcohol. "Have you ever noticed that wounds heal better when cleaned with spirits, rather than water alone?" "I have observed this, yes. But you suggest there is a reason beyond the spirit's heat. What if I told you that bread mould, when properly prepared, could fight infection more effectively than any spirit?" Adelina's eyebrows rose. "I would say you're either a genius or a madman, possibly both." It was during their third week at sea that Ethan's modern knowledge proved its worth in dramatic fashion. He was on night watch, using his smartwatch's digital compass and star chart app, carefully hidden from view to verify their position, when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The constellation of Cassiopeia hung too low on the horizon. Combined with the Southern Cross's position, it meant they were sailing directly toward a reef system that wasn't marked on any of their charts. "Captain!" Ethan's shout brought Vane running from her cabin, half-dressed and fully armed. "Hard to starboard. There's a reef directly ahead." "I see no reef," Silas growled from the helm. "The water's deep here, boy. Check your instruments." "Trust me." Ethan pointed at the subtle change in wave patterns barely visible in the moonlight. "The waves are breaking differently. There's something large and shallow about 200 yards ahead." Captain Vane studied the water for a heartbeat, then bellowed, "All hands! Hard to starboard! Drop anchor when I give the word." The Stormcrow heeled over as her crew threw their weight into the turn. 30 seconds later, the lookout's cry confirmed Ethan's warning. "Reef to port." Damn near took her belly out. That night, as the crew celebrated their narrow escape with an extra ration of rum, Captain Vane approached Ethan at the bow rail. "Your eyes are sharper than any man's I've known," she said quietly, "and your knowledge of star paths runs deeper than most. Tell me true, what are you running from, Ethan Reyes?" "Why do you assume I'm running from something?" "Because men don't join pirate crews out of wanderlust. They join because the life they left behind offers them nothing, or because staying would mean death." Her pale eyes reflected starlight. "Which is it for you?" Ethan considered telling her the truth, the whole impossible truth, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he said, "I'm looking for something. Something I lost." "What manner of thing?" "The way home." Vane nodded slowly. "Aye, that's something we're all seeking one way or another." She turned to go, then paused. "The crew respects you now. You've earned that. Don't squander it." Their first raid came 2 days later, when they intercepted a Dutch merchant vessel heavy with sugar and silver from the Caribbean colonies. Ethan had hoped to avoid the violence, to somehow remain a non-combatant, but Captain Vane made it clear that every member of her crew fought when fighting was required. "A ship is only as strong as her weakest link," she told him, as the crew prepared for battle. "If you won't fight beside us, you're not one of us. And if you're not one of us..." The boarding action was brief and brutal. Ethan found himself swept along by the tide of screaming pirates, cutlass in hand, too terrified to do anything but swing when someone swung at him. The Dutch crew surrendered quickly, but not before Ethan had seen men die, really die, with blood and screams and the terrible finality of stopped hearts. In the aftermath, as the crew divided the spoils, Ethan made a discovery that changed everything. In the merchant captain's cabin, hidden beneath a false bottom in a chest of navigation instruments, he found half of something that made his smartwatch's sensors go haywire. It was jade, carved in intricate geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow in the lamplight. Metallic veins ran through the stone. Magnetite, he realized, remembering his physics classes. When he held it close to his watch, the device's magnetic field sensors spiked, and for just a moment, the cracked screen flickered with readings that defied logic. "Temporal displacement detected," scrolled across the display before it went dark again. "Quantum signature match, 94%. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. This thing, whatever it was connected to what had happened to him. Connected to the Aurora, to the impossible rift that had torn him from 2020 and dumped him in 1716. "Ah, you've found my little treasure." Ethan spun to find Captain Vane watching from the cabin doorway, her expression unreadable. "This is yours?" Now it is. Took it from a Spanish treasure ship 3 months past, along with the other half. She produced a matching piece of jade from beneath her coat. The Spanish captain said it was an Aztec artifact, combined with Chinese astronomical knowledge, called it the Jade Astrolabe. When the two halves were brought together, they formed a perfect sphere covered in intricate carvings, symbols that looked like star maps mixed with mathematical formulas, and threading through it all were those metallic veins that made Ethan's watch go berserk. There was writing with it, Vane continued, a prophecy of sorts. When the starborn child comes to mend the sky at Dragon Gate, twin suns shall writhe and heaven's door shall open. Poetic nonsense, I thought. But now... She looked at Ethan meaningfully. Now I wonder... Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion on deck. Silas burst into the cabin, his scarred face twisted with anger. "Captain, we have a problem. That merchant vessel we took, she was flying Dutch colours, but her papers mark her as English. We've just robbed a ship under Crown protection." Vane's jaw tightened. "How certain are you?" "Certain enough. And certain that Commodore Nathaniel Hawke of His Majesty's Navy will be hunting us within the week. He's been stalking these waters for months, looking for any excuse to put a noose around your neck." The name seemed to hit Captain Vane like a physical blow. Her hand went instinctively to a scar along her collarbone, and her eyes hardened. "Hawke," she whispered. "Then we run. Set course for Tortuga. We need information, supplies, and a place to lay low while we plan our next move." Tortuga proved to be everything Ethan had imagined and worse. The infamous pirate haven was a sprawling collection of ramshackle buildings, taverns that never closed, and people who asked no questions as long as your silver was good. The air reeked of unwashed bodies, cheap rum and moral decay. It was there, in a tavern called the Laughing Skull, that they met the cartographer who would change everything. He was an ancient man, skin like leather and eyes clouded with cataracts, but his hands were steady as he examined the jade astrolabe by flickering candlelight. "I know this device," he wheezed. "Seen its like once before in the hands of a Chinese explorer who claimed it could open doors between the world of the living and the realm of spirits." He traced the carved symbols with one gnarled finger. "But this one's different. More complex. The star patterns..." He looked up sharply at Ethan. "You understand astronomy, young man?" "Some." "Then you'll know these aren't random decorations. They're a star map, showing the positions of celestial bodies during events of great magnetic disturbance. Solar storms, they call them in the Chinese texts, when the sun's fire reaches out to touch the earth." Ethan's pulse quickened. "And Dragon Gate?" The old man's smile was gap-toothed and knowing. "A place where the earth's magnetic field runs strange, where compasses spin like dancers and the northern lights sometimes touch the water. The Spanish call it El Triángulo del Diablo. Your people might know it by another name." The Bermuda Triangle. Ethan's blood turned to ice water. He was talking about the Bermuda Triangle, that legendary region where ships and planes disappeared without trace. And if the prophecy was right, if the astrolabe could somehow open heaven's door during a solar storm... "How far to Dragon Gate?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. 3 days hard sailing to the northeast, but you'll not want to go there, lad. Ships that enter those waters during the aurora storms, they don't come back." That night, as the crew slept off their shore leave, Ethan found Captain Vane standing at the Stormcrow's bow rail, staring out at the star-drunk Caribbean sky. "You're planning to sail for Dragon Gate," he said. It wasn't a question. "Aye. The prophecy speaks of a starborn child who will mend the sky. You arrive from nowhere, speaking strangely, dressed in clothes no tailor on earth has made, carrying devices that confound our understanding." She turned to face him. "Tell me true, Ethan Reyes. Are you that child?" Ethan looked into her pale green eyes and made a decision that would doom them all. "Yes," he said. "I am." The next morning brought news that chilled everyone's blood. Thomas had gone ashore the previous evening and failed to return. Search parties found him in the custody of local authorities, arrested for brawling with British sailors. But the circumstances were suspicious. Witnesses claimed the British had started the fight, and that Thomas had been targeted specifically. "It's a trap," Silas growled as they gathered in Vane's cabin to plan a rescue. "Hawke's here, or his agents are. They're using the boy as bait." "Then we give them what they expect," Vane replied. "We walk into their trap, but we do it on our terms." The rescue mission that followed became the stuff of legend among the Tortuga taverns. Ethan, driven by guilt and desperate to save his young friend, proposed a plan that seemed insane but just might work. Using his knowledge of chemistry and the ship's store of gunpowder, he improvised a series of flashbang explosives that would disorient their enemies long enough for a swift extraction. The plan worked perfectly until it didn't. They freed Thomas and were fighting their way back to the harbour when British Marines appeared from concealment, cutting off their escape route. In the running battle that followed, Ethan found himself fighting alongside Captain Vane, his modern reflexes and unpredictable tactics proving surprisingly effective against trained military opponents. It was during that fight that he saw her true nature for the first time. Arabella Vane wasn't just a pirate captain, she was a force of nature, moving through combat with lethal grace, every shot perfectly placed, every sword stroke economical and deadly. But there was something else in her eyes as she fought, something that looked almost like joy. They made it back to the Storm Crow and escaped into open water, but not before Ethan caught a glimpse of their pursuer. Commodore Nathaniel Hawke stood on the dock watching their departure, and even at a distance Ethan could see the cold intelligence in the man's pale eyes. This was no ordinary naval officer. This was a hunter who had found his prey. "He'll follow us," Vane said as Tortuga fell behind them. "Hawke's lost too much to pirates to let us slip away again. He'll dog our wake until one of us is dead." "What did you take from him?" Ethan asked. Vane's hand went to her collarbone scar again. His brother, 3 years ago, off the coast of Jamaica. Young Lieutenant Hawke, fresh from England and full of righteous fire. He died with a sword in his hand and my blade in his heart. That night, as they sailed toward the mysterious waters of Dragon Gate, Ethan told Captain Vane the truth. All of it. The time travel, the quantum rift, his desperate need to return to 2020. He expected disbelief, mockery, perhaps accusations of madness. Instead, she listened in thoughtful silence, occasionally asking technical questions that demonstrated a sharp understanding of both navigation and natural philosophy. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The aurora that night you arrived," she said finally. "I've sailed these waters for 10 years, and I've never seen lights like that so far south. And your devices, your knowledge of star paths we've never charted." She nodded slowly. I believe you. The question now is what we do with this knowledge. We use the astrolabe. We wait for another solar storm and we open the rift. And then I go home. Ethan met her eyes. And you become legend. The next 2 days passed in a strange atmosphere of anticipation and dread. The crew sensed that something momentous was approaching, but only a handful knew the full truth. Dr. Montserrat had been brought into their confidence, and her scientific mind had seized on the implications with fierce enthusiasm. "If what you describe is true," she told Ethan, as they prepared the astrolabe, "then we are about to witness the greatest natural phenomenon in human history. The practical applications alone." Her eyes shone with possibilities. The medical knowledge you've shared, the concept of bacterial infection, the potential of bread mould as an antiseptic. This could save thousands of lives. "We'll save thousands of lives," Ethan corrected, "in about 300 years. They reached Dragon Gate on the morning of the 3rd day, sailing into waters that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly quality. Compasses began spinning wildly, and several crew members reported feeling strange tingles in their extremities. Ethan's smartwatch, which had been mostly dormant since his arrival, suddenly blazed to life with readings that defied explanation. "Magnetic anomaly detected," scrolled across its cracked screen. "Temporal field fluctuation imminent. Quantum cascade event probable." "How long?" Captain Vane asked, reading over his shoulder. "Soon. The solar storm's building. Look at the horizon." To the north, the sky was beginning to take on an unnatural hue, green and violet threads dancing between the clouds. Aurora Borealis, impossibly far south, painting the Caribbean sky with colours that belonged to the Arctic. It was then that Commodore Hawke's frigate appeared on the southern horizon, her white sails cutting through the afternoon heat like knife blades. But she wasn't alone. Another ship sailed alongside her, flying familiar colours. "Christ's blood," Silas breathed. "That's the Storm Crow." He was right. Impossibly, there were now 2 Storm Crows sailing these waters, the one they stood on, and another approaching from the south under the guns of Hawke's frigate. "Temporal echo," Ethan whispered. "The rift's already beginning to form." We're seeing ourselves from another timeline, another possibility. But even as he spoke, he realised the truth was worse than that. The second Stormcrow flew different colours, not the black flag of piracy, but the red banner of mutiny. Silas had finally made his move, seizing control of the ship and delivering it to Hawke in exchange for a royal pardon. "All hands, prepare for battle!" Vane's voice carried across the deck like a clarion call. "Mr. Crow has shown his true colours at last, but will not go gentle into that good night." The battle that followed defied every convention of naval warfare. 3 ships manoeuvred through waters that seemed to twist space itself, while overhead the aurora grew stronger, casting eerie light across the scene. Ethan climbed the mainmast with the Jade astrolabe, trying to align its intricate mechanisms with the growing magnetic storm above. Cannon fire thundered across the water as the 2 Stormcrows engaged each other in a battle that was both real and impossible. Ethan could see Silas on the deck of the other ship, bellowing orders to crew members who should have been standing right beside him. The paradox was tearing reality apart at the seams. "Now, Ethan," Captain Vane's voice cut through the chaos. "Whatever you're going to do it now." Above them, the aurora had become a writhing mass of energy that seemed to reach down toward the sea. Lightning crackled between the masts of all 3 ships, and the water itself began to glow with phosphorescent fire. Ethan pressed the 2 halves of the astrolabe together and felt power surge through the device like a living thing. The jade sphere began to spin in his hands, its carved symbols blazing with inner light. The metallic veins that ran through it sparked and danced, and suddenly the air around him tore open like fabric. Through the rift, Ethan could see Griffith Park in 2020. His own world, his own time, calling to him across centuries. The portal pulsed with every heartbeat, and he knew that if he was going to go, it had to be now. But as he prepared to leap through, he looked down at the deck of the Stormcrow and saw his friends fighting for their lives. Thomas, barely 11 years old, standing back to back with Dr. Montserrat as they faced Hawke's Marines. Captain Vane, blood streaming from a wound on her forehead, still fighting with the fury of a hurricane given human form. He could save himself. He could go home. All he had to do was jump. Instead, Ethan Reyes made the decision that would echo through legend for centuries to come. He twisted the astrolabe's mechanisms, not to stabilise the portal, but to redirect its energy. The rift that had opened to 2020 collapsed, but in its place, new doorways tore open across the battlefield. Commodore Hawke's frigate, caught in the dimensional crossfire, vanished into a swirling vortex that deposited it in the middle of the Sahara Desert, circa 1543. The mutinous Stormcrow, along with Silas and his treacherous crew, fell through a rift that led to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, but in the year 2157. The energy backlash sent Ethan tumbling from the mast into the churning waters below. As he fell, he felt Captain Vane's ring, a simple band of gold set with a single emerald, pressed into his palm. "Remember us," her voice followed him into the dark water. "Remember that we were here." The last thing Ethan saw before the portal collapsed was Arabella Vane standing at the rail of the Stormcrow, her pale green eyes bright with tears and laughter, watching him disappear into the space between moments. He woke up in Griffith Park, lying in a crater of scorched earth, with his ruined VR headset still smoking beside him. The aurora was fading from the sky, and his phone, miraculously intact, showed 11:48 p.m, October 15th, 2020. Only 1 minute had passed since the accident, but in his hand he held Captain Vane's ring, and embedded in the VR headset circuitry was a fragment of jade that pulsed with inner light. Over the following weeks, Ethan threw himself into research with the desperate intensity of a man trying to prove he wasn't insane. He studied astrophysics, quantum mechanics and temporal theory, looking for any scientific explanation for what had happened to him. The jade fragment resisted all attempts at analysis, but his smartwatch had recorded enough data to suggest that his impossible journey had actually occurred. The final proof came 2 months later, when he was visiting the Natural History Museum downtown. In a new exhibit on colonial Caribbean artefacts, he found a display case containing a gold ring set with an emerald dated to approximately 1720. The placard read, "Ring of unknown origin, discovered in the personal effects of the notorious pirate captain known as Grim, Arabella Vane." According to contemporary accounts, Captain Vane claimed the ring was a gift from a starborn navigator who saved her crew from destruction. Historians consider this claim to be typical pirate folklore, though the ring's provenance remains mysterious. Ethan stared at the display for a long time, remembering pale green eyes and the sound of his name called across 3 centuries. Then he walked out of the museum and into his future, carrying the weight of legend and the knowledge that somewhere in the past his friends were still sailing toward their destiny. In his apartment that night, as he worked on new equations that might someday allow him to control temporal rifts instead of simply stumbling through them, Ethan Reyes smiled and thought he heard the distant sound of wind in rigging and waves against a ship's hull. Somewhere in 1720, Captain Arabella Vane stood at the bow of the Storm Crow and watched the aurora dance across the Caribbean sky, remembering a strange young man who had taught her crew that legends were just truth waiting to be discovered.